Okay. Madam Secretary, everybody's here except Major McCoy. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's meeting. We got the agenda.
Yeah.
First, we're going to do the proclamations. The first one is a proclamation for Trinity Episcopal Church Sesquicentennial Celebration Proclamation.
So this proclamation is signed by Mayor Pro Tem Josephine Solis, and it reads in part, whereas Trinity Episcopal Church of Victoria celebrated its 150th anniversary on November 3rd, 2019, and whereas in 1954, the church established the parish school today known as Trinity Episcopal School, and whereas Trinity Episcopal Church family continues to serve the community through its many outreach programs, including the Pine Street Community Center and the Sandwich Ministry, now, therefore, I, Josephine Solis, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Victoria, Texas, do officially declare November 3rd, 2019 to be Trinity Episcopal Church of Victoria Day in Victoria, Texas.
Do we have anybody that's coming up for this proclamation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Do you want to join? She's heading down there. Do you want to go?
Go. Are you a church member? Go ahead. Oh, there's lots of
Doug,
Whoa, whoa.
Doug, do you want to say a few words?
Do I have to?
You don't have to.
No.
I didn't know that you were lost for words.
We just, I am a little bit at a loss for words, but we certainly want to thank the city and Ms. Solis and all the council for the proclamation.
Well, thank you very much.
The
This-
second-
Go ahead.
Okay, the second proclamation is for the Municipal Court Week Proclamation Week.
This proclamation was signed by Mayor Raleigh McCoy, and it reads in part, whereas more people come in contact with the municipal courts than all other Texas courts combined, and public impression of the Texas judicial system is largely dependent on the public's experience in municipal court, whereas the City of Victoria is committed to the notion that our legal system is based on the principle that an independent, fair, and competent judiciary will interpret and apply the laws that govern us, and that judges and court personnel should comply with the law and act in a manner that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. And whereas Victoria municipal judges are not policymakers for the City of Victoria, but are bound by the law and the canons of judicial conduct, and are required to make decisions independent of the governing body of the city council, city officials, and employees. Now, therefore, I, Raleigh McCoy, Mayor of the City of Victoria, Texas, do hereby proclaim the week of November 4th through November 8th, 2019 as Municipal Court Week in recognition of the fair and impartial justice offered to our citizens by the Municipal Court of Victoria. That's right.
And I think our municipal court judge is here as well as municipal court staff, so if you can come up. Ashley, can we get a picture of this one?
I'm sorry, Josephine.
I am getting up.
Oh, there's more.
Already did these.
Next, we have the GIS Day Proclamation.
This proclamation is signed by Mayor Raleigh McCoy, and it reads in part, whereas the science of geographic information systems, or GIS, connects people, regions, and systems, and whereas GIS is an important part of geography awareness, helping people collaborate and share knowledge so the system we rely on to work each day, and whereas the City of Victoria is committed to expanding GIS to the schools and general public in order to showcase real-world applications with GIS, now therefore I, Raleigh McCoy, Mayor of the City of Victoria, Texas, do hereby proclaim November 13th, 2019 as GIS Day and urge all citizens to participate in GIS Day activities.
And I believe we have our GIS team here, so if you can please come up. Don't be shy.
We're going to move up the item on Sudden Link, and we're going to do that before we do the citizens' communication, okay? Thomas can give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Solis. Members of council, good evening. I have a city manager's report tonight. There is no action for you to take tonight, but I thought it was important to go ahead and give this report before citizen communication tonight, since I believe several members of the community are here to talk about this issue tonight. As you know, there have been several complaints about the cable television and internet service here in the community, and I think you probably have seen an increase in those number of complaints, particularly after the newspaper article yesterday. This issue was originally raised by Councilman Balknight about a month ago, and at that time, I gave an answer basically saying that this is out of the city's hands, and I wanted to elaborate on that tonight to give more information about the regulatory authority that covers cable, TV, and internet services, and what the city's role is in that. First off, I want to point out that Suddenlink says they have recently migrated to a new system, and they are aware that they are experiencing customer service issues. They are working to resolve those issues, I understand, and I have no doubt that they will get back on track eventually. Nevertheless, there has been a large increase in the number of complaints in Suddenlink's system lately. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said that they've migrated to a new system, and I know that you're the messenger, but system, is that, the system is the reason that the signal is so sporadic and spotty, or is it a billing system that they've switched to? Because do you happen to?
I can expand on that if you like.
Please do. I'm unfamiliar
so-
with the
Because
technical.
we may
Sure.
already not be addressing the
Right.
issue.
Sure, yeah. No, I've been part of several conversations over the last 2 days with some of the higher-ups with the company and trying to understand what is going on. And this migration it's a CRM system, so it's a billing system, but also their customer service software program. And so they went through this migration, and it definitely brought forward more complications and issues than they anticipated. They did increase their staffing levels, accounting for increased challenges, but the challenges were far greater than what they had anticipated. And so the issues of the software that they migrated to is the primary backbone of their issue. So, for example, people having issues accessing their account online. Well, the software program touches that online system. The system that customer service representatives access when they get called was also impacted because it was all part of the same system. And so it caused disruption not only with people trying to access their own account online, but even in talking with customer service reps, the customer service reps themselves, the software they had access to was also changing and was also different. And so that entire migration process created some issues. The end goal of the migration of the software is to get to a point where customer service is better, the technology is better, where customers can, chat and utilize other more technologically advanced mechanisms to address their customer service needs, and be able to have more tools on the online presence of Suddenlink. And so that's the system that they migrated. Now, I realize that some of the complaints are related to the actual service that they get at home.
The
Part-
product, not the
Correct,
customer service.
correct. Pa-
The
part of-
product they receive.
Part of the migration of the software was that software also touched the boxes. And so there was also some issues with them not having challenges accessing, sending signals to the boxes. And so if people were, maybe getting a channel, or I'm sorry, not getting a channel that they were supposed to be getting, there was issues with the system that would ping the box at home to correct the issue. And so there was definitely a lot of issues on the back end that they faced through this migration. So that severely impacted their operation. And so what they've communicated to us is that migration is nearing its end, and that over time, hopefully, some of those customer service relationship aspects get better. But it's a whole other conversation if people are not pleased with the quality of the service in terms of the speed, the internet speeds, or things of that sort. That's a different issue outside of this software migration.
That answered my question. Thank you.
And thank you for filling that in, because my presentation tonight is going to talk more about the regulatory environment rather than Suddenlink's business practices. And I don't mean to single any one business out in the community, but I am aware that that is the company that most people are complaining about right now with this process. One of the problems that you as council members are experiencing right now is that a large portion of our community believes that our city regulates cable TV providers and internet service providers, and they're coming to you with complaints asking you to do something. And unfortunately, you're put in a position where you have to say, I'm sorry, there is very little the city can do. And so part of my message tonight is to attempt to dispel the notion that the city regulates Suddenlink. We do not. And we do not have regulatory authority to influence their business practices in any way. In fact, cities are actually prohibited from regulating cable TV in the state through local franchise agreements, because that regulatory authority was taken away from us in 2005. At that time, the existing franchise agreement that we had with the cable TV provider was grandfathered, and it was allowed to remain in place until 2014. But once it expired in 2014, we have no control over the cable franchise agreements here in town. This is actually a statement from the PUC's website. It says a state-issued certificate of franchise authority, what's called a SICFA, must be obtained in order for the provider to offer cable television service in a particular service areas. SICFAs are obtained solely through the Public Utility Commission of Texas. They are not issued by the city. So that's what I mean when I say that the state is holding the franchise agreement for Suddenlink and not the city. Now, it's important to point out that a SICFA does not include customer service standards. The PUC does not regulate customer service standards. Consequently, if a citizen files a complaint with the PUC will not respond to that. They will merely forward that complaint on to the service provider themselves, because the SICFA does not require customer service standards. On the other hand, the federal government does provide customer service standards. The Federal Communications Commission has established customer service standards that the provider must follow, at least until there is more than one cable TV provider within a jurisdiction. And in Victoria, there is only one right now, so they are required to follow those standards. If you have a complaint about cable TV or the internet service through your cable TV, you can file those complaints online at consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. There are locations on that website for citizens to file complaints both about cable TV and about internet services. The FCC says they will forward the complaint to the provider, and the provider has 30 days to respond to the consumer. Now, you'll notice that I have twice now said that if you file your complaint through the regulatory agency, they will simply forward it to the provider. So my recommendation to citizens who are interested in filing complaints is as follows. First, please contact your service provider. That's the shortest and most direct path to file your complaint. If you go through the regulatory agency, they are simply going to forward it on to the service provider. If that contact does not resolve your issue, then you might consider filing a complaint with the FCC or with the PUC. Finally, if that does not resolve your issue, you might consider changing service providers. I think it's important to note that there are multiple internet service providers in Victoria. There are multiple television providers in Victoria. There is multiple ways for customers to get the services that they're looking for. Suddenlink is not a monopoly in this community. And so I think it's important for citizens to remember that if they're not satisfied with the business being provided to them, that they do have options. In order to help communicate this information more fully to the citizens in Victoria, I've created a new page on the city's website. It can be located at www.victoriatx.org/city-attorney/franchise-information. And on that page, there is additional information about cable franchises in the state of Texas, about who the regulatory agencies are. There is contact information for the companies in town who have CICFAs. There are 2 of them, although only one of them is currently offering services. And there is also direct links to the FCC Consumer Complaints webpage. So citizens can have more direct access to someone who might be able to do something about it. Finally, if I can bring up 2 other items to your attention. Mayor McCoy, of course, is not here this evening, but I spoke with him this afternoon. And he urged me to ask council to take a firm stance in letting Suddenlink know of his dissatisfaction. And he asked me to recommend that we bring back to the council meeting at the next meeting a resolution that council could adopt that would express our dissatisfaction with the service being provided in the community. That resolution could then be forwarded on to the state representatives such as Jeannie Morrison or Lois Kulkhorst. It could be forwarded on to the PUC and the commissioners at the PUC to make sure that they're aware of our community's dissatisfaction. If you're interested in doing that, I can have that prepared for the next meeting. And finally, before you begin any deliberation about that, I want to also point out that at our next council meeting, I'll be bringing to you for your consideration a franchise agreement with Victoria Electric Cooperative. You know that they provide electrical services here in a part of our community. This new franchise agreement is for broadband internet services. It will allow them to provide internet services throughout the city. And so that is a long process. Obviously, they are at the very beginning stages of that, but I have been in contact with them, and they assured me today that they do intend to provide internet services throughout the city of Victoria. That's the end of my presentation. I'll take any questions that you may have.
I'm confused on how we could enter into a franchise agreement with this other company if you're saying that the state is the one that regulates. So I missed a connection somewhere.
I don't blame you for being confused. Utilities law is a highly complicated area, and every type of utility provider is regulated differently. Suddenlink is considered a cable TV provider. They provide internet services on the back of the cable service that they're providing. VEC is an electrical provider, and they follow a completely different set of rules. So while we are prohibited from having a franchise agreement with Suddenlink because they have a cable franchise with the state, we can and do have a franchise agreement with VEC for their electrical service.
So I hate to punish one for someone else's bad deeds, but can we have standards in the agreement with VEC that might head off problems like this?
We could, but I don't recommend it. it is not normal for cities to include customer service standards within their franchise agreements. A franchise agreement, if you think about it, is like a real estate lease where a private company is using public property, our rights of way, to run their private lines. Okay, so the power line is run on public property. They pay us what's called a franchise fee to lease that property from the public. There are standards associated with their use of public property, but it is merely similar to a real estate lease, and it does not typically include standards for how that business conducts its operations.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thomas, I have a question. It seems like the Suddenlink company is trying to bring us up into the 21st century tech-wise. Are they going to be requiring that we all keep the Altis versus the old DVRs and the T-boxes or whatever box they call it? Because I've been having major problems for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I've had no TV, and that makes my husband kind of upset. Okay, so today I called them and I was informed that yes, we could keep the old DVR and the modem for the internet. And I said, well, why did the representative, when I called up, did not inform me of that? So that's part of the problem, that the salesperson tells you one thing, and then when the service guy comes, it's another thing. So maybe we can communicate that to them and tell them, hey, you know, I know they're trying right now, but it's frustrating to us as customers that we get told one thing on the phone, and then when the service provider when the technician comes, he says, oh, no, that's not true. And there you go, not, you know, again, starting all over again.
I understand how difficult that can be. I do not know Altis or Suddenlink's business plans with regards to their equipment. I do not know whether they intend to allow you to keep one box or require you to have another.
Right, because if they require you to upgrade, it's kind of like now Windows 10 saying that you have to have Windows 10 before, you know, so I'm panicking over here. Okay, so, yeah, just wondered why, you know, if they were intending to obsolete the old equipment to where we're gonna have to go with the new boxes.
Just a word of caution. I talked to one individual 3 or 4 years ago. A service tech took his box, didn't give him a receipt for it because it didn't occur to him that he needed one, but they took his box, but Suddenlink is not aware of that or refuses to acknowledge it. So he's paid $11 a month for the last 3 years for a box that he does not have. And they're willing to give him another one, but he'll have to pay for that as well.
Oh,
So if a tech takes your box, make sure you get a receipt.
I think,
For all of these issues, let me circle back to the recommendation that I'm giving tonight. Please contact the service provider and continue to give them an opportunity to fix that. Or if you are dissatisfied with your service, you can file a complaint with the PUC or the FCC, or you can change service providers. If there are no other questions, yes, sir.
I've got questions. The new internet service that's going to come into town, do they run it across electric lines, or do they run across Suddenlink lines?
Again, I'm not familiar with their business practices, but it's my understanding that they have multiple delivery methods, some of which may include fiber, some of which may include over-the-air broadcasts.
Well, if competition came into town, can they use Suddenlink's fiber?
Suddenlink's fiber is owned by Suddenlink. That would be a business decision of Suddenlink.
So if competition came in and they wanted to do fiber, they'd have to do their own fiber? Unless they had an agreement with Suddenlink?
I suppose that's correct.
Potentially. And that's one of the obstacles that sometimes holds back having several providers is how expensive the build-out is. And so that's a challenge.
Do any cities in Texas have their own internet service or cable TV
As a
service?
utility, no.
No? Is that even possible?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We can't keep
I
our
don't know
roads
whether-
maintained.
And Councilmember Lofgren, let me also say, because you bring up an interesting point, some of the complaints that I have seen, citizens will say things like, I know the city can tell Suddenlink they have to provide this kind of service or that kind of service, and it's simply not true. I've also seen citizens' complaints that say, why is the city preventing others from coming into town? And we're not. We are not prohibiting any business from coming into town and providing service. We are welcoming them if anyone else wants to come into town.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask those questions. People need to understand the
Right.
lay of the land here.
Another complaint suggested that we could force another business to come into town to fill the service gaps. That is also untrue.
We'd have a Cracker Barrel and Luby's.
Not in that order.
Yes, correct.
So, Mr. Garza, when you talked to them, did they understand on the customer service software side and new system, did they speak at all about their actual internet service, their, as Ms. Scott said, their product, which slightly stinks, is inconsistent?
Sure. No, I mean, at this point, the conversation is focused on the customer service challenges that they had due to the migration of the software.
Well, they wouldn't have any customer service problems if they actually delivered a product
That's
consistently.
exactly right.
Right.
People wouldn't be calling them.
So I wasn't really, when I brought it up, I wasn't worried about the customer service side as much as having a product that I'm paying for that's consistent at my house
Right.
or business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we do this resolution, where's it go from there?
We would take that resolution and share it with our state representatives, Representative Morrison and State Senator Colkhorst, as well as sharing it with the commissioners at the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay. All right. Well, I encourage us to keep pushing. And
But that wouldn't rise to the level of a complaint to the FCC. That would be a,
well, I'd say send it to the FCC too. Complaint on the behalf of citizens of Victoria.
As the body.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to open up to citizens' communication.
Ashley.
Oh,
Yeah.
So tired of looking at us.
How much did you pay her?
What's the next item that you want to go move on to?
are we going to do citizens' communication?
Citizens' communication.
Okay.
Okay, citizens' communication is now open. And as a courtesy to others, please remember to keep your comments to 5 minutes, under 5 minutes if possible.
I'm Michael Vondro. I live at 2204 East North Street, 20A. I have a complaint about Suddenlink. They put a line up and they ran it on the ground and ran it to 22B. So that technician, could he please come hold it up so I can mow underneath it? You know, I would appreciate every time I have to mow, you know, he can hold up the line so I don't cut it. You know, I think that's just very unprofessional. And could he please come and do the job right? You wouldn't want a cable through your front yard, you know, from another neighbor. And I don't understand why he did it. And I've never seen such terrible work. And he could put it on the lines, tie wrap it. It wouldn't be that much trouble. I'd appreciate if someone could call Suddenlink and have him do his job correctly. That's it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mayor Pro Tem Solis, council members, City Manager Garza. My name is James Dodson. I reside at 410 North Vine Street here in Victoria, and I would like to speak to the Suddenlink issue this evening. I think each of you should have received an email from me today going in at some length the issues I've had recently with Suddenlink. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but I would just like to speak to some things that kind of came out of my experience with Suddenlink. And I'd like to start by addressing this issue, the problems being caused by their migrating their new system, migrating to their new system. We've recently seen in several occasions storms that affected communities. I would liken this issue with Suddenlink to a storm. That is, they experienced problems that they didn't anticipate. But like communities, they should have had a plan, a resiliency program, a contingency plan to address this before they started the migration. It's very obvious they didn't. I have spent hours and hours and hours communicating with them, starting 2 months ago, essentially. And it became very obvious some of the issues and problems that they internally face. Lack of communication. Each time I spoke to someone who told me that they had the authority to resolve the issues I was dealing with, told me that they would take notes so that if this went to someone else, they would have those notes available. I wouldn't have to spend time going back over it again and again. It never happened. The latest one was, it was supposed to be sent up to the regional manager, finally. I called her, and she had not received any of the information that I'd provided to numerous people along the way. I will note that that regional manager, about 2 minutes after I sent my email to you today, did send me an email saying that she was working on it. I'd spoken with her the day before, and they think they had identified the problem, which turned out to be not a software issue or a customer service issue in their eyes, but simply a mechanical or electrical problem with the modem. They did send someone out and they repaired it. But the issue is not that I wanted my modem fixed. The issue is I wanted to migrate my phone number to AT&T. But for 4 weeks, Suddenlink effectively blocked my ability to do so. And as a result, AT&T canceled my order for their service because they couldn't get it resolved with Suddenlink. I don't even know if that's going to be resolvable yet. I do now have telephone service through Suddenlink, which is a big improvement because I haven't had 911 service at my house for 5 or 6 weeks at least. But Suddenlink needs to take a very close look at their internal operations and try to be more effective in addressing customer issues. You call, you don't get through for hours. They will ask you to schedule a call back. Sometimes that has been scheduled 2 days out. You can't get someone within an hour or two, 2 days out. And when that scheduled call time arrives, you get a message, we need to schedule it out further. So it is a disaster, but it is a disaster of their own making. And we as customers should not have to put up with that. I urge anyone and everyone here to support finding another provider of services, at least high-speed internet. I mean, I can migrate TV to AT&T, on demand, all these other opportunities via internet, but I don't have access to the kind of high-speed internet I would like to have virtually anywhere else in town. So I think one of the best methods of ensuring that they do what they need to do is to bring in someone else who competes with them, at least for the high-speed internet service. And I would appreciate your help in that. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dodson. Anybody else? We're still open with citizens' communications.
Council members, my name is Silvano Silva. I live at 810 Santa Fe. I've lived there for 22 years. My cable bill has gone from 60 some odd dollars to well over $210 a month, and the service is terrible. I know that part of their problems is their upgrades of equipment, but they have antique equipment. You can't run new software with antique equipment. Their own personnel have told me that. I had an outage for 3 days, no telephone, no cable, no internet.
I called the number that I was supposed to call, and I was told that it was a system-wide outage. Really. I called again the following day, the same thing. I called another time the following day, the same thing. Finally, a Suddenlink rep came to the house, and he told me that there was a bad connection at the pedestal. A connection for my house. Now, that being said, 2 weeks prior to that, the entire run to the house was replaced because it was bad. So give me a break. You didn't fix the connection to the new cable, but you ran a new cable. It just doesn't make sense. We need help, and we're at the mercy of Suddenlink if we want cable and TV and telephone all bundled together. It's just not worth it. Me personally, I wouldn't have it, but my wife is insistent that we do have it, so I felt pretty good not having any cable TV or telephone for 3 days. But anyway, we're at the mercy of their antique equipment and them trying to update their software equipment. And it would be useless for us to call them right now because they don't get the messages. Our best bet would be FCC or whoever we're supposed to call, and 30 days later they pass it down to them. But honestly, we're between a rock and a hard place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Chris Ragsdale, and I just thought this would be relevant to speak to as far as the Suddenlink issue goes, although I do want to talk about another issue soon after that. It is relevant to Suddenlink, but not specifically in the city of Victoria. My company, Southbound RV Park and Cabins, we recently, I actually did a little research to figure out, what kind of internet service I could get out there. And it's kind of funny, like there's a fiber optic line literally running 8 feet from my property. And so I've contacted probably, I don't want to exaggerate here, probably 6, 7 people within the Suddenlink / Altice company over the last 6 or 7 months, basically begging them to give me a quote so I could get new service. And this is for a business class fiber optic service that I'm requesting. And they just can't figure out how to go about that. So my impression of that is they don't want my business. And so as it was said earlier, there are other options, and I would encourage any citizens to check into those as well. That's it for my comment regarding that. I'm not familiar with the process. If I wanted to comment on a agenda item that comes up later, do I need to do that now, or will that be time for that?
If that is one of the items that is up for public hearing, then you could speak to it at that time, but you're welcome to address it now since you're already at the microphone. Why don't you just go ahead and do that?
Sure, okay. So this time, I'm going to wear a couple different hats here. So representing my company, Crossroads Septic Solutions, we do septic system installations, maintenance, repairs, that kind of stuff. So regarding a variance for Mrs. Estella Perez, it is in the ETJ of the city. And basically, Mrs. Perez's home was damaged about 2 years ago in Hurricane Harvey. And it is my understanding that through some sort of federal program, she was provided a new home. Part of that, situation being that she needed a new septic system. So my company was contacted to take care of that need. And then we found out that, well, it was in the ETJ and we have to go through this process here. So that being said, we did a little bit of due diligence to kind of figure out what that price would be. We don't have any firm bids because obviously there's a design criteria that has to be met, but that cost is estimated to be $30,000 or more, many times the cost of a septic system, and Mrs. Perez doesn't have the money. And so I would, humbly suggest and thank you for considering that variance there. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. Anybody else? Having nobody else come up, we're gonna start with the items.
Before you
for-
do that, you never asked for items from council?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm near. Okay.
That's all right.
Items from council.
At present, we combine the second and third reading of ordinances. I'd like a resolution brought back so that we can discuss whether we should keep combining the second and third reading. So if a resolution is brought back, then we can all discuss it here on council, whether we want to continue that practice or not.
We could also take a consensus right now.
We
We
could.
can't discuss the issue right now until it's brought
It's,
before us.
it's not on the agenda for tonight.
Is it a resolution that would come back or just a discussion item?
Just a discussion item.
It can be done as a discussion item and a consensus of council. If we were to do it as a formal resolution, it creates a historical record.
What has it, I'm sorry, go
Oh, I was
ahead.
gonna say, every item still has the chance to go to a second and third, you just have to split it. So that's always on the table.
I think we need to discuss that when it's on
Yeah,
the agenda.
let's bring that agenda item back. Once it's properly on the agenda, then we can debate it
That
more
was just a matter of fact,
more fully. Yeah,
correct?
okay.
Yes.
Thank you. We can discuss fact, correct?
Right.
No, we're not supposed to discuss anything that's not on the agenda.
Sure.
I'm still thrown by the resolution. This is an item from council. You know, sometimes we have a discussion on an item and then a resolution comes at a later time. And when a resolution comes as the first time we have a chance to discuss it, sometimes I feel very pressured that the decisions have already been made and that's why it's on the agenda. That's why I've kind of asked if it would be a discussion item as opposed to a resolution. But I suppose a resolution can be voted down as well.
And it can be tabled, too.
And it can be tabled. Tabling is confusing, but yes, it can be. So while Councilman Lofgren asked for it as a resolution, under this item, or this council member would ask that it not be brought as a resolution before we had a chance to discuss the concern. Just have it as an agenda item.
As a discussion of how we put this item on the agenda going forward, that is within council's discretion, and I'll defer to a consensus of council for how we post that on the agenda. Is there anyone else want to make a comment one way or the
I
other?
think that's the mayor's responsibility to set the agenda for the meeting.
It is.
Okay.
It really
Y'all
is.
just putting it on me, that's all y'all do.
It doesn't matter to me if it's a resolution or whatever,
pay.
as long as we discuss it.
Why don't we bring it back for discussion then?
It's fine.
I would think a discussion would be good.
That's fine.
And then, because didn't we just discuss it to take it and put them both together? We didn't go to a resolution that I remember.
I don't know. I wasn't here.
In a couple of years.
It's been a while, but I thought we just discussed it and then we changed it. But I don't know. We'd have to discuss it, find out which way
Bring
to
it
do it. Bring it up as a
We'll have a more
discussion.
thorough discussion about it at the next meeting.
Okay, I suggest that.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other items from council before we move into item C1? Okay, then item C1 on the agenda is an ordinance amending Table 3.1 in Section 21-92 of the Victoria City Code to ease parking requirements for hair and nail salons, repealing conflicting ordinances, providing for publication, enforcement, codification, and savings, and declaring an effective date.
Good evening.
We are going to change the way that we do our ordinances or public hearings. We are going to have the ordinance read, and then we're going to have staff discuss it and explain it. And then we're going to have the public hearing after that. So that way, the public knows what we're trying to do, and then we'll have the motion and discussion amongst ourselves here. Okay? Thank you, Julie.
Good evening, Council. So this is a pretty straightforward ordinance amendment. Our department had received a lot of feedback from different hair and nail salon owners that were trying to open different businesses within our community that our parking standards were too stringent. Currently, our parking standards for hair, our personal service establishments are 3 spaces per 1 workstation. Because of that feedback we received, we went and researched what other cities comparable to us have for their standards, and that research showed that by far the 1 space per 250 square feet of gross floor area was the most popular standard for regulating the parking of hair and nail salons. And so with that information, staff did some field research of existing salons within our community and found that they that maybe chairs have been added after a certificate of occupancy has been issued, but all of the salons would comply with the proposed 1 space per 250 square feet. So staff is recommending that we amend the ordinance from 3 parking spaces per 1 station to 1 parking space per 250 square feet of gross floor area. And at the October Planning Commission, the Planning Commission concurred with staff and recommended approval unanimously. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You said all of them meet it except for the King of Kings, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. There's a table on the 2nd page. That list out the square footage, the number of parking spaces they have, the second to last column is what they're currently required to have, and the last column is what they would be required to have under the proposed ordinance. So if you compare the number of parking spaces column with the proposed ordinance column on the last column, you will see that, yes, all of them but the King of Kings would comply.
Now we can ask questions of staff
Yes.
before we open the public hearing.
Yes.
I have a question. You're removing it from personal services, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
What does personal services cover?
So we don't have an exhaustive list of all the different uses in each of the categories, but our most common personal services that would remain would be massage parlors or tailoring establishments. Also, a lot of the services that you may find at a hair and nail salon that are incidental and subordinate to that primary use of being a hair and nail salon, perhaps facials or other, like I said, subordinate type services as standalone businesses would still fall under the personal service category for our parking requirements. But the most common that we see in our office would be massage parlors.
Are these the only 10 in this table in town?
No, we just took a snapshot of, we tried to do a certain number of all over town, as well as shopping, ones that are in tenant centers or shopping centers, and then standalone.
So how's that affect if they are in a strip mall area?
So the standard parking requirement for retail and strip centers is 1 per 250, so it would be in line with what typically centers are developed as.
Okay.
And the shops that are in residencies, how are you determining that? Does that go with the residence requirement of 1 and 2 parking spaces?
Yes, typically we do not regulate home-based businesses. If the primary use is for a residential, then any home-based business would be incidental or subordinate to that primary use, and so we don't generally regulate businesses because of our lack of regulatory authority over.
So you're saying the home-based businesses are not included in this ordinance?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
On page 15 of our packet is I'm guessing is the chart in the ordinance, and under personal services, I see that beauty salon's been removed, but that's still reading 3 spaces per workstation. Is that what it used to be, or is that something that needs to be fixed? I'm not sure whether that's the ordinance as it is that you're pointing out, or the ordinance.
Are you looking at the table that at the bottom of the page says page 3 of 5?
I think I'm looking at the C2
So personal services remains, and we crossed out beauty salon and kept personal services as 3 spaces per workstation. And then if you look, we added a row underneath that that says salons, beauty, hair, and nail, and that's 1 space per 250 square feet of gross floor area with a minimum of 3 spaces.
Okay, I see what you're doing. I just knew you were talking about personal services and didn't look below
I
that.
apologize. Normally, we bold the additional language that we're adding, and
Okay.
unfortunately, we did not bold that.
Is there anyone that wants to talk about this? Now's the time to do it. Open up to citizens'
hearing.
communication,
Public hearing.
a public hearing, I'm sorry. Seeing no one, I need to have a motion.
I'll make a motion, we take the staff's recommendation and approve this amendment.
I second it.
Okay, there's been a first and a second. Is there any discussion?
I'm still on that chart, and now I do have a question. So because of personal services, did you say that that was, for instance, a massage? So do they have workstations? Is that what they're called?
We would classify that each bed would be a workstation.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not going to have to change it after we get it adopted. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none? I need a vote. All those in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All those against? None. Okay.
That
Motion
takes us to
passes.
item C2, which is an ordinance repealing section 24-32 and 24-33 of the Victoria City Code to eliminate certain fees collected by the municipal court that'll now be collected under state law, repealing all conflicting ordinances, providing for codification and savings, and declaring an effective date.
Good evening, Council. I'm here today to present information regarding some legislative changes that occurred in this past fiscal year. So we are currently authorized under city ordinance to collect a municipal court building security fee as well as a technology fee. And effective starting in January, these will now be collected under state law. So state law did create a local consolidated fee, which will include both of these fees that we are collecting under city ordinance. So the city ordinances will need to be repealed. So this is a chart that is included in your packet. It is a $14 fee that will be imposed on all Class C misdemeanor offenses, and it will be allocated to 4 different funds mandated by state law. We have the Municipal Court Building Security Fund and the Technology Fund will be included in this fee, as well as 2 additional fees that are not currently collected. So we have the Local Truancy Prevention and Diversion Fund, as well as the Municipal Jury Fund, which are 2 new fees. This is a breakdown of what each fee will have. So the Municipal Court Building Security Fund we currently collect is $3. This will be increasing to $4.90 effective January 1st. Based on this past year, we collected $16,933 for this fee. And with the increase, we're estimated to collect $27,700. And that's if the cost or the ticket amount remains the same in addition to the fees being paid on those particular fees. So some of the items that can be purchased include things like metal detectors, video conferencing systems, courtroom security and signage, bulletproof glass, things of that sort. We also have the Municipal Court Technology Fund. This fee is not changing as far as the amount collected we'll be having. We collected $22,572 in fiscal year 2019. This, again, the fee is not changing. We have used this fee to purchase ticket writers, our maintenance on our ticket writers for the police department. We've also used it for our software system, computers, scanners, and other items such as that. This is one of the new fees we will be collecting effective January 1st. It's called the Local Truancy Prevention and Diversion Fund. This fund is, again, required by state law. We become the trustee of this fund in addition to all the other fees discussed. There is no option to distribute these amounts to the state. We are estimated to collect $28,200 in fiscal year 20 based on the building security and technology fees previously collected. So this particular fee can be used for the following: a juvenile case manager salary and benefits, training for this position, the juvenile case manager, office supplies pertaining to this position, and any additional necessary expenses as related to that. So we would propose to convert a current clerk position to a juvenile case manager. We currently have 3 court clerk positions, so this would not be a new position. It would be used to supplement that position that we currently have. We don't have a juvenile case manager in place, but it would be used to designate somebody as that position. Some of you may previously remember in 2015, we had brought this to council previously, and we did decide not to move forward at that time as it was based on city ordinance only. So city would be the one that was imposing that fee by passing the ordinance rather than it being state mandated. We also have experienced a decline in juvenile caseload. Now, the caseload is still continuing to decline, but now state law effective, it was Senate Bill 346, is requiring us to collect this fee whether or not we have a juvenile case manager. So now we are evaluating that from an operational perspective rather than financial. And so even if we don't have the position, we still have to collect this fee. And we cannot use it unless we have that position. And essentially what that role for that position would be is to streamline the court processes and procedures for all juvenile cases. And those are cases involving minors that are aged 10 to 16, and then also be the direct point of contact for parents and the juveniles and help navigating the court requirements or judge's orders. The last fee for this presentation is a municipal jury fund. It will be a 10-cent fee that's imposed as part of that $14 cost. Estimated $560 will be collected based on prior numbers, and that fee can be used for jury reimbursements or expenses such as paper and postage. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
That position for the jury manager, case manager, it will be in this fiscal year coming up, so that's already programmed in there?
It is not currently programmed. It is something that I've already had conversations with HR as well as my supervisors on that. And it would be something, I don't have an estimated time of when that would come into place. We would still have to designate somebody. I would look for October 1st to allow us time to evaluate what all that position would entail. We would have to come up with a job description and other logistical pieces for that position.
We're planning to put this in the next year's budget,
Okay.
coming forward to y'all. Still, you're gonna see it again during the
Okay.
budget process.
Is that person going to be involved with the truancy also?
No, we do not handle truancy cases. Those are all currently handled through the Justice of the Peace Courts.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Public hearing. Does anybody want to speak to us in this items? Okay. Since no one's coming up, we're going to ask for a motion.
I move to accept item C2 as presented.
Second.
Discussion. Any discussion over this?
I know I'm not expecting an answer, but I would like to know why the state legislature would pass something like this where it creates more paperwork, and why not just keep the collection of the fees local? It just makes no sense to me.
So does that mean that the money's going to get collected, sent to the state, and come back to us?
No, so this bill is actually about 137 pages, I believe. It's a huge bill that affects a lot of different fees. So this fee is just collected locally. So we have a $14 court cost, and there's going to be a $62 consolidated court cost that has state fees in it. It's quite a large bill.
Basically, what you have here is a state mandate in the city. What this is, you shall do this and collect it.
So this money, this $14 will be 100% retained by the city. None of this is being sent to the state.
Okay.
They have a separate fee that they are collecting.
Okay. Okay. We've had a first and a second. Now we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All those against? Motion passes.
All right, that takes us to the consent agenda tonight. There are 3 items on the consent agenda that will be approved by a single vote. They are first, the approval of minutes of the special meeting of October 14th, 2019, and the minutes of the regular meeting on October 15th, 2019. Second, an ordinance amending section 10-63 and 10-67 related to food establishments to correct references to state code and change the required composition of the Food Establishment Appeals Board, repealing all conflicting ordinances, providing for codification and savings, and declaring an effective date. Item D3 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with New Gen Strategies and Solutions to assist the city with the process of finding a new provider for handling commercial containerized waste collection in an amount not to exceed $65,000 and declaring an effective date.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those against? Okay.
Item E1 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with the U.S. Fixed Income Trust and its Texas Public Funds investment pools, allowing the city of Victoria the ability to participate in fixed income trust investment pools, designating the city manager as the authorized representative for this program and declaring an effective date.
I move to adopt E1.
Second.
Okay. We're going to go over the investment pool monthly yield.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide this illustration to give you guys an idea of the yields provided by this new pool in relation to the current pools that the city is participating in. And just, it's just the point of passing this resolution is just to provide the city with an additional overnight option, just maybe a more competitive option if it's offering more competitive rates in comparison to which ones we're already using. I just want to reiterate, we're not investing any money tonight. It's just essentially giving us approval to open accounts with Texas Fit. And then Ken Couch is here on behalf of the pool if y'all do have any questions on how an investment pool functions.
Any further questions?
Gilbert, I'd like to see 8-10%. I wish we could.
Those days are gone. Okay. Let's vote on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it.
Item E2 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a professional services agreement with Lockton Dunning Services of Lockton Companies LLC to serve as the city's healthcare benefit consultants for an estimate total annual amount of $96,000 and declaring an effective date.
I move to adopt E2.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
We have a presentation.
Presentation.
Sorry.
A few comments, that's
Cheryl?
okay. That's okay. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Tonight, we bring forth a recommendation for your consideration regarding a new benefits consultant, Lockton Dunning Benefits, known as Lockton. The RFP that we conducted was described in the CM1 presented to you. Out of 11 responses, we landed unanimously on Lockton being that recommendation of choice. I have with me tonight Clint Jackson, who's the VP of the Public Sector. I'd like to introduce Clint and have him come up and just speak a few words about the services and what Lockton can offer us if this is approved as a recommendation. Clint?
So what everybody has in front of them, by the way, good evening. What everybody has in front of them is a placemat. This was a placemat that we used for the presentation. I believe it was on August 16th. So for those of you that are not familiar with Lockton, or Lockton Dunning is a series under Lockton Companies. Lockton Companies is the largest independent, privately held insurance consulting firm in the world. We have 7,600 associates. We did about $1.7 billion in revenue last year. Lockton Dunning Benefits, which is headquartered in Dallas, actually has more lives, covers more lives, manages more lives in the state of Texas than any other firm. We're pretty proud about that. So if you look at Lockton Dunning, the contract would be through Lockton Dunning as a series of Lockton Companies. You can kind of we have the highest satisfaction rate from J.D. Powers. We have a 96% retention rate. So if you're going to categorize brokerage and consulting firms, you can see there's a scattergram down here at the bottom where you have boutique brokers. You get a lot of service, but they don't necessarily have that much experience or the technology. And then you have your mega public consulting firms. So Lockton, you're going to have the best of both worlds with Lockton. So with this contract comes a service team. You can see this service team is made up. The team lead will be John Sims. He'll be supported by Valerie Nystrom and Elaine Werner. That team will have access to subject matter experts. You can see that Sarah McDonald for communications, Rebecca Elliott for voluntary benefits, Kimbra Roberts for health risk solutions, which is our wellness program, and then Dr. Meyer, who's over our pharmacy services. Dr. Hale was actually present at our meeting with the committee. All of these resources will be readily available to your Human Resource Department as well as to the city. So what makes Lockton Dunning, if you flip it over, what's different between us and a local or a local brokerage or consulting firm? Lockton Dunning has historically, because of Tom Dunning, has historically not been in the public sector. So the market share that we've been able to accumulate over the years is done organically, and it's primarily on the commercial side. But we realize that you have to go above and beyond nowadays to be able to control medical costs. What we do is all about making your health insurance program more affordable, more accessible, and more sustainable over not only the immediate future, but also for many years down the road. So with us, we have a high-cost claim unit. We actually have connectivity with all of the major carriers and third-party administrators. That means that all of your medical and pharmacy claims are going to come into our, what we call Infolock, which is our data warehouse. At that point, our actuaries will get involved. Dr. Buck will get involved. We have 2 medical directors. So we will be performing medical and pharmacy claim audits, as well as making sure that the companies that are doing business with the city live up to the terms of their contracts. So and that's going to be a continual process. So you can see here with the high-cost claim unit, less than 1% of your population is responsible for over 30% of your claims. We are going to be hands-on working with the utilization management teams and the medical directors with the various carriers, being where you are. You're currently with Aetna, and we have a great relationship with Aetna. But we're going to be making sure that they're following through with what they agreed to in their terms of their contract. The stop-loss specialty practice, we're already engaged with that. The data analytics is also just kind of goes into exactly what we do with the data. So we will be capturing that data on behalf of the city and be able to provide reports as requested. That's good. Any questions? Yes.
Okay.
Just a brief summary of some of the things I think we can look forward to with Lockton as that recommended benefit consulting for us. So Clint and I are here if you have any other questions for us tonight.
I have some questions for you just about the process. I noticed there's not anybody local that responded to the RFP. How do we advertise for the RFP?
So I know that we we went out and picked some companies to be involved just based off of word of mouth and some other cities' involvement with those cities, as well as the BidNet process with our procurement.
So any of the companies locally get contacted that were doing anything healthcare related for RFPs?
I'm not sure if I'm unfamiliar with whatever local companies might exist that can offer the level of service that would have met our RFP guidelines, but we certainly reached out to different companies. I mean, we received proposals from the company that provides benefits consultant for the county, for example.
Yes, sir.
We received a proposal from them. I'm not sure who else submitted that might have had some kind of local ties. But regionally, a lot of the main players that responded, are typically going to be out of Corpus, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas.
Lockton actually does have a local tie, if you don't mind me bringing
Oh,
that
that's all
in.
right.
So they do have some services with Citizen Hospital, just some actuary services like long-term, short-term disability, life insurance, things of that nature. Outside of that, Mr. Bucknight, I can go back to our purchasing department and find out sort of what the internal workings were, at least from a local standpoint. But we did advertise it with BidNet. I think that got out there quite a bit, and we followed up with some other companies that we knew were at the top of the list based off of just feedback from other cities as well. And we asked them to
I'd like to encourage us to think about local companies first when we go out to these RFPs and make sure that, some of them may not be on BidNet. They don't cast the big net like a company like this would. They're not tied into those services. Typically when I bid projects, I subscribe to the service at ABC, of course, for construction projects, but also people call, say, hey, I'm gonna bid this project, I'd really like you to take a look at it. And I don't know if you've seen it yet, have you gotten anything from it? And I think we owe it to our local businesses to try and get them, they may not be able to respond to it. It may be too much for what they're capable of doing, but at least I think we need to reach out as a city and look at what we have locally and give taxpayers a chance to look at some of this stuff.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Duly noted.
And we agree 100%.
Yeah. Duly noted. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
What was our reasoning for not going back to Willis Towers Watson?
So overall, I think just the challenges that we've had with our health fund. We've been with them for 9 years. We had a strong partnership with them, but it was time to, I think, shop the market, if you will, and see what else was out there that could be more aggressive for us in managing our self-funded plan. Willis's agreement was going to come back. Currently, we spend $60,000 on their annual agreement. It was going to come back $15,000 more, and so we decided, based off of just again some of the challenges that we had with our self-funded plan, to do our due diligence out there in the market. I think with what Lockton has brought to the table, we're very excited with regards to what we're going to be able to do with them.
So we currently have insurance through Aetna, correct?
We do, yes, sir.
So being that we have issues with the premiums and the service provided, if we chose to change companies, how does this translate? Or how does he transfer the services?
Lockton is our consultant, and they'll be guiding us through the issues that we might be having with Aetna. They'll be helping us with design to our plan and guiding us with recommendations on what we should see happen, especially with regards to our funding of our health fund. And they understand our balance between that with employees' impact as well as the self-funded plan. So all along, if Lockton's selected, they'll be sort of our guiding force in working side by side with us to help us strategically put together a plan and manage that. If we're not pleased with Aetna, we have 1 more year of our 3-year rate guarantee with Aetna, and that'll be plan year 20. Then they'll help us go out to bid for other networks, which could include Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, all the big carriers or even smaller ones.
I'd like the Lockton representative to look at Exhibit A and go to the, page 2 of that B. Client acknowledges that commissions may be paid by insurance companies, other intermediaries, and third-party commissions. Can you explain that? Explain commissions. Where do the commissions come from? Who's going to get the commissions? And how does it affect the $90,000 that we're going to be paying?
And thank you very much. This is something that we pride ourselves on, is complete financial transparency. There are other revenue sources that are outside of commissions that don't necessarily affect your bottom line, but that are paid by carriers that are in the marketplace. We've agreed to track those on behalf of the city, to account for them, and anything above and beyond the negotiated cap of $20,000, we will credit that back to the account, and the city may be able to use those funds to either offset the fees that we're talking about or to buy additional services that would benefit the employees.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's not uncommon in the business for there to be these commissions. It's just companies vary on the credits that they give you for those commissions, or vary on the level of transparency behind these commissions. So the commissions principle is very standard. It's just what do you do with it that differs from company to company.
So the recommendation is not price-based alone, is what I just heard.
No, it is.
She
'Cause of the
just said it's
credits.
gonna be $75,000 for the incumbent, and this one's 96,000.
Yeah, as far as our
Yeah,
selection
it's
from
a
an
higher
RF
amount for this consultant, if that's your question.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Yes, sir. So what we did
But
was
it
we
wouldn't
did-
have had been 75, because it jumped up from 60 to 75?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the bid they came back with regards
it.
to our
So what's the
RFP process.
21,000 extra dollars get us that
Sure.
Willis Towers
Well,
Watson
I can
doesn't?
tell you that the bulk of that was conducted in the committee interviews, right? And so, for instance, in the committee interviews, it included myself, Gilbert, Cheryl, and Wanda. And so us four got to meet with 8 out of the 11 companies to really dive into the details of some of these questions, right? And so part of that is the recommendation that's in front of you is, this is the professional recommendation that all four of us as professionals have, that we believe that this company has a better product to offer, that they have better customer service to offer to our HR employees, that they have better transparency that we can pass on to our employees themselves. And so I don't think it's necessarily fair to talk in this setting about some of the specific differences between who we're recommending and maybe who we have now. But I would simply convey that we feel very strongly that Lockton will provide a better service to us from what we had prior to.
Well, I don't know about, I never dealt with Willis Towers. Didn't have to deal with Aetna or something. But I don't know what service you're talking about, because the number one concern is that we got some crummy health plans.
Sure.
That's what we have, and that's what we're stuck with. I'm trying to figure out what we're gonna pay extra for this, but it's not gonna change our plans that we're offering employees.
Well, it
Not
could.
immediately.
It could very well. Lockton could come back.
Not
and we've already
immediately.
shared some ideas based off of
And,
employee feedback.
and also, keep in mind too, that part of and I know Cheryl has used this term before, she's referred to it as, our health fund, our health insurance situation, it's sick, right? And so I think it's important that we keep in mind that part of what we're trying to get to be more solvent is the fund in its entirety. Yes, we care about the contributions that the employees make and the premiums that the employees pay, but keep in mind that this is a fund that has been bleeding cash left and right. And so what our goal is yes, ultimately to lead to lower premiums for our employees, but quite frankly, we're trying to find the best deal that we can with our stop-loss carrier. We're trying to find the best deal that we can on the pharmaceutical side so that this fund doesn't bleed as much as it has in the past. And so we're not, again, only trying to solve the issue of the premiums from our employees, but trying to stop the bleeding from our fund so that as we add money to it, it kind of slows it down a bit and we can build up the fund balance. I know Gilbert has gone through the finances with you in the past, and, just to kind of as a reminder, we have roughly 100 lives, 100 less employees enrolled in our plan today, but yet it's costing us about $1 million or so more in medical expenses with 100 less employees. So the cost of healthcare is increasing significantly, and that's how they try and come in and help us. As an example, we're currently going through the process of shopping around, for lack of a better term, for a stop-loss carrier. And different companies have different resources and have different tools they can leverage to try and ensure that us as cities get the best deal possible, which might save us hundreds of thousands of dollars to the fund. Now, employees might not see that, but it'll maybe slow down the bleeding on our fund. And so that's part of it. We talked briefly about the commissions, and he mentioned about holding these companies firm on their service agreements that they have with us. Oftentimes, unfortunately, what happens is that where cities struggle is holding these different, let's say the pharmaceutical piece, accountable for maintaining a certain level of service that is costing us money. And so part of the reason why Lockton cost more is because, as he showed in this graphic, the level of professional staff support that this team has, I can tell you, is significantly higher than any of the other companies that came to the table in terms of the level of expertise that's on the team. So the intent is that these experts that make up this team will do a better job of keeping people honest, help us develop a better wellness program, which is why they have somebody that specifically focuses on that. They have somebody that specifically focuses on pharmaceuticals, where a lot of these companies don't have these tools. You know, some of these companies come in and they offer you a team of 2 people, or a team of 3 people, or a team of 1. And so Lockton has a much broader team, and because they have more people and with a higher level of experience, well, it's gonna cost us more money. And we think that we're gonna see that return in the future. Now, we can always come back, and of course we will, you know, if it doesn't work, and if it's not working, and they're not keeping up their end of the bargain, well, then we'll change again. But we certainly weren't getting anywhere with where we were.
And if I could just add one last comment to that, one of the things that I think drew our attention to Lockton as well was the employee engagement and education piece that Lockton will help us with. So they're partners and an extension of the finance team and the HR team here locally, but they can help educate our employees around how their benefits work, what's the benefit of that, where they maybe can go for cost effectiveness with regards to accessing care. We've talked to them about the clinic concept that we've been kicking around. Lockton's on board with that. They're going to be going and helping us sort of design that strategy. So a lot of really good talk that maybe, you know, was discussed with our former benefit consultant, but just not aggressive enough as we need to. And we feel like we're going to get that with Lockton.
As a former city employee and a current retiree on the city insurance, after 9 years of being under Willis Towers Watson, I'm ready for a change. I'm tired of being a victim of this, so I would highly commend and applaud the team for going out and looking after the employees' well-being and the insurance. So I would highly recommend that we go with this recommendation.
Well, if we do pass this, my expectation is that we'd see some major changes in the next year.
And that is the plan.
If we don't, then the 21,000 is not worth it.
Sure, and just to manage expectation, our goal is to, if there are significant changes, for those significant changes to come in the cycle of 21, not so much 20, because we're already going through open enrollment right now for calendar year 20. The only really thing that's lingering out there is a stop-loss piece, but just to manage expectations, if there are any significant changes, they wouldn't come until
Right, but we'll be
a year
talking
from
about
now.
them in July and August. Yep.
And that will
Correct.
come in the form of any plan design
Correct.
changes or anything along those
Correct.
lines. We are hoping with Lockton coming on board and starting to work with us as soon as January that we can renegotiate some things and already start seeing some savings with regards to what we currently have. So
Savings in the health fund.
savings in the
not
health
in-
fund, yes,
Correct.
sir. Mhm.
Yeah.
and it's all connected at the
Not
end of
in
the day,
premiums
right?
yet.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, I think some of our departments have lost employees due to the increase in health premiums and.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
And one of the biggest hits, I think, was police departments. If I'm correct, the police officers had left due to the poor insurance that we had.
Sure, but
So,
keep,
and we need to fix that.
agreed. Keep in mind too, from a management expectation standpoint too, that this piece is only one part of the equation. Another part of the equation is us at some point having a conversation about to what degree are we as an entity wanting to fund X percentage of these costs for employees. Those are policy directions on our end, right? Because the cost of medical insurance, they're not gonna magically make that, more affordable. But the key is that they're gonna help us make better policy decisions and help us develop a long-term strategic plan that we can come forward to you, say this summer, and say, look, this is where we stand. We're gonna get to a better plan by doing X, Y, and Z. X might be, evaluating Aetna. Y might be us looking at increasing our level of contribution. So at the end of the day, it's not just Lockton, but it's us and the available resources that we have. So I just want to manage expectations. This isn't going to solve everything, on its own, but it's definitely one piece of the equation that we need on board.
Great.
Okay, this is for a 12-month period, and then it says it's renewable. Is it renewable for a certain time or just as we
So it's
decide to-
renewed automatically every year unless there's something that changes with regards to the agreement. And if we decide to terminate the agreement, then we'll follow the guidelines that are spelled out with regards to that clause.
Okay,
So
thank
it'll renew every year unless something changes, and then we'll be bringing it back to you for approval. And there is, I don't know if, sorry, Clint, if I missed you mention it, but there's a 5-rate guarantee with Lockton, so that 96 will be 5 years guaranteed. And they also have a performance guarantee basis as well. So if we're not pleased with their performance, then it's upwards to 50%, I think, of that cost back to the city if they don't meet certain performance metrics. Any other questions?
I just want to thank you and the committee for looking at it in as much detail as you have.
Thank you.
I'll second that too.
Thank y'all very much for your support.
Okay.
Is it already motion and second? I can't
Yes, we
remember.
had a
Yes,
motion
a
and a
motion
second.
second. So I'll
Is that
call,
out of order?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion passes.
Item E3 is a resolution granting variances to section 10-115 and 13-27 of the Victoria City Code, which prohibit the installation of a septic tank within 1 mile of an existing city sewer service main for property located at 1223 Odom Street, which is owned by Estela Perez, and declaring an effective date.
I move to accept item E3.
Second.
Okay.
Good evening, council. As was mentioned earlier, Ms. Perez's home was substantially damaged during the Hurricane Harvey, and as a result, it had to be destroyed. It was also, demolished. In addition, it was found at that time that her septic tank was need to be replaced as well. However, her water well was still operational, and it could remain as it was. Afterwards, Ms. Perez applied for a grant through the General Land Office, and she received that grant and is required to rebuild her home on the same site. Her contractor, Stonewater Inc., out of Rockport, Texas, was not aware at the time that the city's ordinances required new home construction to tie into city water and sewer services if those sewer services were available within 1 mile. Her home is just barely outside of the city limits in the ETJ. If you like, I can give you some more detail on the costs of those, but there's a map in front of you that details where those lines are. If you don't want to see the detailed costs, then it is staff's recommendation that we move forward with the resolution to approve the variance request. Answer any questions you might have.
No more discussion? I call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against?
Thank you.
Motion passes.
Next up, we have a few items under city manager's report, and the first one will be related to TCAP, and Gilbert will tee that off.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Pro Tem, Council. Tonight's presentation will address future energy procurement options to consider. As you recall, in the later part of calendar year 2017, we enter into a 5-year fixed fee contract beginning January the 1st, 2018, and it's supposed to end December 31st, 2022. The 5-year contract was procured through TCAP, Texas Coalition of Affordable Power, excuse me, and has generated an average annual cost saving of about $596,000 over the past 2 years. It was about $496 first year, and the second year is about $691,000, but I average them out. You probably wonder why we're talking about this. We have 3 years left. Well, when you're dealing with the energy commodity market, it's a little different. You want to stay ahead of the plan. You want to help us plan ahead, just like any way you want to plan in your investment strategy in the market. Same logic here. Well, tonight, like I said, we want to present some type of procurement options to consider in the near future. With us tonight, I have 2 representatives from TCAP, and Margaret Summer Eve, I have to slow it down on that name, is the administrative director for TCAP, and Bill Starn, he is the vice president of Energy Resolve, is TCAP consultant on energy. They're going to give you a history of the TCAP, where we've been, where we're at, talk about the contract, and then Bill's going to give you some options to consider in the coming years. It's just one of the first steps. We're going to talk about energy with y'all. Probably come back in the latter part of December or early part of January after we get with Thomas, look over the contract and see what needs to be done. In addition, tonight, I have Chris Buster. Did I say that right, Chris? Brewster. There's a movie out there. I know I messed it up somehow. But he's our TCAP lawyer. He was Lloyd Gusling. Probably messed that up too. But he's going to answer any question you have tonight. It's a big firm in Austin. They're good, believe me. But anyway, gentlemen, ladies, I'll give it over to Margaret. She's to kick it off. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm just going to take a few quick minutes to go over what TCAP is, who we are, and how the City of Victoria fits into that. I know there's some booklets up on your dais that talks about, it's just a real brief overview. We produced those booklets this last year. We give them out to our new members that join TCAP. It gives the history of just TCAP. I'm going to go a little bit further back than that, though, tonight, and I need to push. Okay. Actually, what happened was in 1999, the Texas legislature deregulated the retail electric market, which was effective in 2002. And back then, the South Texas cities joined together and started the South Texas Aggregation Project, STAP, and it was formed with 41 political subdivisions here in the South Texas area. The City of Victoria was a founding member and was on the board for many of those years, still on the board. The first contract, back then, when the deregulated market was so new, it was hard to, nobody was giving long-term contracts. We were very lucky to get a one-year contract. And so many of those early contracts were 1 year, some were 6 months. And so it's kind of evolved now that we're, almost 18 years out. But how TCAP came to be was that STAP, South Texas Aggregation Project, used the same consultants, same general counsel, same everybody as the North Texas group, which was called the Cities Aggregation Power Project. So STAP merged with CAP in January of 2011, and the name changed to TCAP. So who is TCAP? We have 162 members within the deregulated ERCOT market. 52 members are in the South Zone. I didn't put the ERCOT map up here, but it's very easy to see where ERCOT is. Basically, El Paso, the Panhandle, and those counties that are along the Louisiana coast are outside of ERCOT, and TCAP cannot help those cities in those counties because they're not part of the deregulated market in ERCOT. So why TCAP? What makes TCAP different? TCAP is a nonprofit organization. We are for cities by cities. We pool energy of all of our members to negotiate lower rates. And what is great is that cities have very similar energy patterns. Just real briefly, the chart that's up there is the average load of an August day in ERCOT versus TCAP. And for ERCOT, which is all of, most of Texas, the power surges are usually about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody's getting home, or 5 o'clock turning on their air conditioner, getting that house cool. For cities, the power surge, the most usage is at night when pump stations, lift stations, street lights are coming on. And because you can see we're the blue line, we're a very attractive load in the energy market to get the lower rates because we're not following the ERCOT load. So again, I said that TCAP is a for cities by cities organization. We have 15 board members. Those in blue represent our large members. Those in green represent our medium-sized members. Those in the orangey red are our small members. And then the gray are the at-large members. You can see that we have representation from all over the state of Texas. Also, as part of the bylaws, there has to be someone on the board from each of the 4 ERCOT zones, so north, south, Houston, and west. And so you can see that we have all of that as well. Again, I said that in the early years, we were lucky to get one-year contracts. You can see in 2002, the city of Victoria had a 3.7 cent rate. And then as you can see, the years went on. In 2005 and 6, there were 6-month contracts through there. In 2008, a 3-year I'm getting ahead of myself. In 2011, there was a 6-month contract. In July of 2011, there was the first 2-year contract. And then in 2014, it was determined that there would be a blend and extend, which means that in a condition to extend the contract 3 more years, they were blending the current price with the future price. And so you can see it went up a little bit. It went to 7.4 cents. And when we were looking at contracts for the term of 2018 to 2022, we did have some of our members ask for a blend and extend as well, but we realized that the best price was a new 5-year contract, which for the city of Victoria is 3.8 cents, so almost half of what you had been paying. So the current contract, as Mr. Reyna said, expires in December 2022. We've developed a new procurement option, and right now we are meeting with our members to talk to them about it and explain it, because it's not just a go out for an RFP, get a great price for 5 years, and sign a deal. It's a little bit more than that. And one of the things in buying electricity is that you have to time the market. Do you think the market is as low as it's going to go? Reading into that crystal ball, and that's why we have Bill. But the other thing is that this new method is going to eliminate trying to figure out when that best time in the market is, just to keep the city always having a low rate. That's who TCAP is, kind of the real brief history of TCAP. If no one has any questions for me specifically about that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Starnes. He's our energy consultant. He's with Resolved Energy. He has been the consultant for STAP and TCAP since 2002. He is continuously monitoring the energy market, and he is the person that negotiates the energy contracts. And I will let him talk more about that.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so everything I'm going to tell you tonight is strictly informational. No decisions have to be made now. It's something for the future, but it's just to give you guys an education that you can start to see that there is options to do things differently. If you look at this at the end of the day and decide the city still would like to stay under a fixed price contract, we're perfectly fine with that, and I'll address that in a minute. But let's walk through what the markets look like. Margaret showed you a lot of price history, and you saw prices go up and come down. And I can tell you when the price came down, that's all because of something y'all are intimately familiar with here, and that's the Eagle Ford Shale and fracking. The fracking revolution hit the United States, and suddenly we became, as you can see on the subtitle, they're the world's largest oil and gas producer. We have been that for the last couple of years, and it's a pretty amazing statistic for a guy who remembers sitting in lines trying to get gas and, you know, maybe 10 gallons today and come back next week. The 2 graphs you're looking at, on the left side is the DOE's forecast from 2016 out to 2050. So there's a couple of years of actual data, and then projections out to 2050 of production of oil, which is shown in the orange, and natural gas is shown in the blue. And on the right-hand side is their forecast for the pricing of those commodities for the same period. So it's like a 30-year look ahead. And you can see production looks great. I mean, we have a very, very positive supply outlook 30 years out into the future, and our pricing is looking very, very stable. The reason I show this to you is because that's what the backbone of the procurement method we're talking to you about is. It's predicated on the fact that we have a pretty stable energy future in this company and country, and I think that's very true. Having being the father to a 28 and 25-year-old daughters, I'm glad to see that their future's looking good and they should have good jobs as I hope the economy continues to grow. And, I'm a believer that energy is the backbone of the economy. Next is electricity prices, and they too, this is the same, it's shown graphically a little different, but it's energy prices out to 2050 from the same study. These are nationwide numbers, so they're a little bit different than what you're used to seeing in Texas. But you can see, again, a very, very stable energy price forecast out to 2050, running about 10 cents a kWh. There's 3 different colors shown here. The blue color is the generation or energy portion. It's the portion you procure with TCAP's assistance. The wires portion, which is still regulated and not subject to competition, they are still regulated rates set by the Public Utility Commission, are shown in the orange and the green. And if you look out over time, you can see that there's a slight decrease predicted in the energy rate and an increase predicted in the wires rates. And that's true here in Texas too, and we're seeing that already. What is a little different here is the nationwide energy rate that starts at about 6.4 cents. That's equivalent to your 3.8. So you see here in Texas, we have a pretty good energy rate compared to the national average. But there are a few differences in the Texas electric market we need to be aware of. One is we are a growing market, and overall in the U.S., it's a very stable market, but it's a very stable market from a growth perspective too. There is no growth in the U.S. market, but in Texas, we're growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm sure every summer y'all see the headlines of record demand, record demand, record demand. And that's because we're a growing state. We have more and more industry, more and more people coming into the state, and our demand continues to grow. That's contrary to the nation as a whole. We did end up with a little short-term supply shortage in the last couple of years, and that was mainly due to the fact, I don't know if y'all remember, back in late 2017, about probably a third to a half of our coal generation in the state announced in October of 17 they would be offline by February of 18, and we lost about 5,000 megawatts of generating capacity just like that. Given that it takes 2+ years to build most generators, there was no way the market could react in time, and we ended up supply short, and we're still a little supply short. And y'all saw that this summer in August when the heat waves hit and prices went crazy. Y'all were fine, you're under a fixed rate contract, but the market prices got pretty high. But the future is looking bright in that regard. ERCOT is predicting that we're going to be very stable from a production and demand standpoint, starting about 2020 to 2021. We should have even a little bit of excess supply by 2021 if the ERCOT forecasts are correct. So we see that price volatility spike that we saw this last summer probably will be coming to an end, and we'll be back to a much more stable market. So as we mentioned to you, the strategic hedging program that we're here to introduce to you is another option for you when you look to the future of what you want to do. We're here a little bit early because, as I'll show you in a minute, the structure of the program means that we're going to be in the market a little earlier than we anticipated to be, and we want to give you all time to think about it and consider where you want to go. So in the future, when we talk to you, we'll ask you, would you like to go strategic hedging? Would you like a fixed price? It is your option. Honestly, as your consultant, I'm agnostic. You go with which way suits you best and where you're the most comfortable. And but I do want to point out, if you do go strategic hedging, it does have periodic off-ramps. We've already negotiated with the energy manager we're going to be using that twice a year we're going to be able to go out to our members and say, if you're not happy with it, we'll get you out of it and convert you to a fixed price. So this is not a decision you have to make that can't be reversed. So what is strategic hedging all about? If you look at your current price, you're about 3.8 cents that you bought in for 5 years. You really didn't buy a 5-year price. You bought 5 one-year prices averaged together. And I picked a time last summer and said, okay, I'm going to break down pricing from 2019 out to 2030, year by year, and this is what it looks like. So if you went to a 5-year contract, we bought your 2018 to 22 contract back in 16. So go 2 years forward, pick the 5 years beyond that, average that price, that's about where you would have been. What strategic hedging is going to do, instead of trying to lock that all in at one time, if you look at the years, year by year, you see that hits a low point about 2 years out. We're going to try to concentrate buying on a year-by-year basis within that low point so that we're offering you an even better price overall than what you've been seeing today. Oops. So how mechanically is this going to work? It's going to be a very competitive RFP process. As a member of TCAP, you don't have to buy retail. We have an exception. Political subdivisions have an exception in the state, and the only group that do that, we can go to the wholesale market and buy for you. And we still have to convert it to retail through a rep, but we can go buy our power in the wholesale market. That is what TCAP does. And we have about 20 vetted creditworthy suppliers we would use to go out and buy under an RFP type process, under a multiple procurement process I'll explain in just a second. We will go out every month and buy 1/12 of your supply needs for 2 years in the future. So if you think about, I'm sitting right now in 2019, I would be procuring 2021 for you right now. And I'm going to do it under a set of 12 RFPs that I issue on a monthly basis. And there's a valid reason for doing that I'll show you in just a second. The main reason is, as Margaret mentioned, it avoids trying to do that all-in guess of when is the market strategically the right time to buy. Because if you think it's now and it all looks like now and your charts are saying now, you don't know where the future lies. And you really are kind of guessing to a degree. You know, even though you have a lot of good data, it may not be right. So this is going to do it in a process similar to the way most people save for retirement. If you think about doing dollar cost averaging in your retirement, you get a paycheck, and every paycheck you pull a little money out and you put it in a retirement plan, in a mutual fund or whatever, and you do that over time. Have you entered the market at the best time? No, you don't, but you don't know when that best time is. But that average turns out to be a pretty good deal for most people. This is the same way we're going to be trying to do your procurements. One of the reasons we're looking 2 years forward is we understand your budgeting needs, that you have to know what your price is going to be when you go into budgeting. So if I was, again, buying 2021 right now for you at the end of 19, we'll know what the price is. And we'll turn around and tell you in early 2020, this will be your price for 2021, long before you get into that budgeting process. So you will be able to know what your price is. Again, it's a very market competitive process. We're going to have a number of suppliers. We'll pick the lowest cost one. It will be very transparent. The bid prices and who is chosen they'll be masked from the names, but you'll be able to see who they are. For competitive reasons, we try to keep the parties masked so that we're not giving out confidential information to the market. This is just a graph to show you why we're doing that dollar cost averaging approach. This is a graph that shows yearly price ranges from 2011 out to 2019 year to date. And that's shown by the blue lines, top to bottom, and where that simple monthly average would have been if we had just gone out and bought 1/12 at a time. And you can see that average price tends to be low and avoid the price spikes. And it doesn't tend to vary that much year to year. It's a very stable approach. It does have a little bit of variation, but it also tends to be a very, very competitive price. And that's what we're trying to capture there. So is this process really working? It's really not a complicated process. It's a pretty simple process, but does it make sense? And we think it does. We have analyzed it using data all the way back to 2005 and showed that even in our worst case examples, it would have saved us 2%. But I think the more telling case is to look at your contract you have today, which I'm showing you by the blue line, and where would SHP have put you if you'd have been under that program? Well, since this contract started in 18, I would have been buying that in 16. I would have been buying, 19 and 17 and on and on. And you can see by the red bars, this is where SHP would have put you in relation to your current contract. And your current contract's a good one, but this saves you a little bit of money by avoiding those high-cost years and concentrating your buying in the valley periods. You save a little bit of money. Below that graph, you can see some estimated savings for the city of Victoria. And on the green bar, excuse me, I forgot to mention that. The green bar is, we've had some of our members say, we may like to buy into a solar contract. Well, the solar contract is a little bit different. It's going to be a term of about 7 to 15 years. It will be a fixed price, and it should only represent a small portion of your usage, because Margaret showed you how your usage doesn't line up with ERCOT, and solar is going to be following that peak curve in ERCOT at 4 to 5 o'clock. That's when solar gets best, and that's not when you guys use energy. So you have to make sure that you buy enough that you can absorb it in your portfolio. And so I would say it's probably about 10 to 20% at best. When you blend that in under market prices that I've seen for 7 to 15-year contracts, you can see it does offer a little bit of incremental savings. That's an iffy number because that solar contract price changes all the time, but it does offer the chance for some incremental savings. And again, on the bottom, you can see the savings in 2018 would have been 40 to 50K, about 70 to 75 in 19. And of course, this being the volatile year in pricing we've seen, for 2021, I would have bought in 19, and it would have been more on the $10,000 to $20,000 range in savings. But it does save you money even over your current contract. Now, I mentioned solar, and I want to dispel something that I see in the marketplace a lot in people dealing with end users, and that is these super low prices. And I have a headline on the left-hand side, this Texas Municipal Utility signs a super low solar PPA, and I circled the price at below $25 a megawatt hour, which is about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It sounds real attractive, but that's not the price to your meter most of the time. This deal here was a deal that was struck by a municipal utility. It's New Braunfels Electric. It was not hidden in the article. It's who it is. And I just want to show you on the right-hand side in this little matrix real quick. I don't want to spend too much time, but when you take that 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour price that's at the point of production, and you start doing all the price adders that the market and ERCOT are going to charge you to get it to your meter, and you can just see them all adding up there, it's going to end up being about 3.2 to 3.6 cents based on where you're at. So when you hear people telling you, oh, these super low solar deals are great, the advice I give to y'all is ask some questions, because it's not always apples to apples. Now, I mentioned to you that you shouldn't necessarily buy all solar, and some people have decided to try to do that. So in order to buy enough solar to meet their needs, they had to over-procure, and then they were going to sell the rest back to the market. I've actually had some of my large city members come to me and say, why don't we just do that? It seems like it's so cheap. And it is cheap as long as you're selling back at a profit. But when that profit in the market ceases to be there, you can lose some money. And I'm sure y'all have all seen these headlines and heard about this situation. This is a city up in Central Texas that tried that approach, and they lost about $6.8 million last year, which, as I understand it, was about $10 per resident per month on their bill. So it's a risky strategy. It's not terrible, but it does have its risk, and that's not one that I think blends well with cities. I think it's better to take a more moderate approach and buy a little bit if that's the way you're leaning. So just recapping, we have a very bright energy future, feel good about that. We have a good future in Texas too. We're trying to bring you a new opportunity that you can look at to try to save a little money in a very ultra-competitive procurement process that tries to avoid market peaks and valleys and buys on a more ongoing basis for y'all, avoiding a lot of the carrying charges and risk premiums associated with long-term contracts, but allows you to know your price prior to budgeting and is flexible. If you don't like the program, you'll have twice a year that you can come to us and say, get me out of it and convert me to fixed price, and we'll do it. So the reason we're here today is because at some point in time, if y'all decide to enter into this, we're gonna have to start procuring for you in 2021 early, and I've gotta have the last few months of 2020 to start getting packages together in order to know who's gonna be where and how much I'm buying for who. So we're asking to get a PSA with TCAP, which we've never had before, executed by September 2020. So we're bringing this today to y'all for informational purposes to mull over it. This PSA is, by our legal counsel's perspective, necessary because we're taking a much more active role in your procurement than we have in the past, where we go out and get bids and bring them to you and you accept the price. This will be, we're taking a much more active role, and our council feels a PSA is warranted there. It will also, excuse me, outline all the services that TCAP provides to the cities. And that is the ability to come to us as consultants and ask us questions and use us, billing services. We have representation at ERCOT, representation at the legislature for cities on energy issues, and that's all part of what y'all get as being a TCAP member, and we're going in that agreement. We've never really gone out and memorialized those services, but we will here. And then if you do want to get into the SHP program, we'll need to get a new CESA, that's a Commercial Energy Services Agreement. It's what you're under today, executed before 2021. The agreement that we have drafted looks just almost identical to what you have today, but the one that you have today has a price set in it. This will say a price as determined by the SHP program. And if you decide that a long-term solar option is a nice blend on this, let us know, because we'll probably have to go out and find it, between now and then. So that's really what we have. Is, again, this is all just informational, and it's just options for you guys to consider for the future. If you have any questions on it, call TCAP, call Margaret over here, and she can direct you to whichever consultant would be the right one to answer your question.
Thank you, Bill. Like I said, we're going to probably get together down in the future in January, probably talk about it. And yes, staff will we'll make a recommendation to city manager, and we'll explain why and everything else. But this is something just to give you a different view of how to approach to procure energy. It's just a different mechanism. Thank you.
All right. So our next city manager report is going to be Julie, providing an update related to the Placido Benavides Design District. You may recall that this item first came to council last year. It did go through a public hearing last year. It went through a first reading last year. And my understanding is that there were some questions that arose from that process. And so after that, staff met with some of the different stakeholders to a greater degree than had occurred previous to that. And then it just stalled for a while. There's no politically correct way to say that. And so now we're at the point where of course, the new council is here. We want to make sure that we re-bring up the topic to bring final resolution to the policy direction that council has regarding this topic. And then that way we can communicate to the stakeholders and give everybody a definite response on what we're going to do related to this. Again, this is strictly informational today too. Ideally, we'd like to get some feedback though from council to help us figure out how to proceed from here.
Thank you, Mr. Garza. So as he mentioned, this was brought forth to council in June of 2018. And the reason that we began discussing a design district is for the reason of the Placido Benavides Capital Improvement Project. As you know, that is a $9.2 million project that is currently under construction that connects a new road, Placido Benavides, from Walmart to Salem Road. In addition to there being the new road, the project also includes underground utilities, including water, sewer, and electric with LED streetlights, and an 8-foot conjunctive use sidewalk. The purpose as defined in the ordinance for creating a design district is to raise the level of quality of development within this area. If you might remember back to our comprehensive plan, one of the big themes in the plan was about community appearance, and community vitality. And so with the idea of protecting this $9.2 million investment, the idea of the design district was born. So the boundaries of the design district were basically created off of the proposed Placido Benavides roadway. And we followed property lines, making sure that we captured properties that were completely abutting the new proposed road, and then looking for the next natural break, which is, I don't think that you've ever seen this map before, with the proposed Ball Airport extension on it, which is that yellow line to the north, but that was a staff decision on why those property lines were chosen, and then where that next natural break would be, and so you see the Ball Airport provides that. So the next few slides are a side-by-side comparison of existing regulations versus the proposed design district regulations. The first is private utilities. Currently, overhead lines may be used in the perimeter easements of subdivisions, but all private utilities within subdivisions are required to be underground, and then also all service lines for commercial properties are also required to be buried in new construction projects. The proposed district requires that all utilities would be located underground, so those perimeter overhead lines would no longer be allowed within the district. You also need to keep in mind that this is a completely greenfield area. So if you look at other areas of town that have been built out over the years, like for example, the John Stockbauer corridor that was built out primarily in the 80s and 90s, you had somewhat of an existing road or water or sewer infrastructure creating that spine, with Placido Benavides being currently being built, with the design standards of everything being underground. The entire area is for the most part greenfield. The streetlights are currently required to be installed throughout subdivisions and developments. And in the proposed design district, we would be looking at streetlights that meet a specific standard that match what is being included in the Placido Benavides project. And nothing signalized, arriving at a place like something uniform, like a different streetlight. The off-street storage requirements are currently such that non-motorized equipment may be located on an unpaved surface. In the design district, all of that off-street storage would have to be located behind screening and be screened from the public view and outside of the setbacks, except for the merchandise for sale. Currently, the current regulations for landscaping is that 10% is allowed to be counted in the public right-of-way. In the proposed district, all landscaping would be wholly located on private property. Manufactured homes and industrialized housing are currently only prohibited in the historic districts, and that prohibition would extend to the design district. And then lastly, billboards and freestanding pole signs are currently allowed. Of course, they are subject to certain regulations. For example, billboards have to have distance and size requirements. Same with pole signs, we require certain height limitations. And in the proposed district, billboards would be completely prohibited, and then freestanding signs would need to be the monument style signs, which is defined in the proposed ordinance. So if you'll remember, we had a few Photoshop illustrations to sort of give everyone a visual of what an area could look like with these standards in place. So this is a view of Navarro looking at Loop 463. And after some fun editing, this is what it could potentially look like if there were no overhead electric lines and all of the signs were monument style signs. And this is a view of John Stockbauer. If only it was easy as Photoshop. And another view.
That's a few $1 million right there.
Right. And a new, and then a view of Navarro as well, close to Salem. So again, we're here to talk about, considerations and next steps. So our recommendation is to schedule a public hearing and ordinance amendment for a future council meeting, and then notify all the property owners in the proposed district 30 days before that scheduled meeting. And
to clarify that recommendation, because it's been over a year since the original public hearing and the original first reading, we're proposing starting from scratch with a public hearing and first reading, just because it's been so long.
I think that makes sense.
So we're happy to take any feedback now, or feel free to sit on it, and I can follow up with you later as well.
Would it be possible to put those side by side Photoshop drawings on the web,
On the where, I'm sorry?
somewhere on the web, on the,
Yeah, for sure. You know, once we establish the district, I mean, it would be easy to have a webpage for the district that stipulates the differences and even has some
just so
renderings.
there's,
yeah.
it's not included in the packet?
Oh, got it.
For public.
Just for the public to look at right now, because I'd like to refer people to it, so, you know.
Sure, and we can make sure that,
Look what it could look like.
sure, we can make sure that if we bring it back, that we include some of these pictures in the memo and,
The agenda, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Can you include that proposed Placido Benavides, the one that has the Ball Airport?
That-
Okay, so you're saying that the district is all in the red?
Yes,
Within
ma'am.
the red,
Within the red, okay, so Placido Benavides is the blue.
Yes, ma'am.
correct.
So you're talking about letting everybody know in this red area that that's gonna be a design district? That's what we're talking about right now?
Yes, ma'am.
Sending them out letters?
Yeah,
to the
minimum.
owners.
And, you
I
know,
think there are adjacent.
Are they aware already? Have you reached out to all of them or some of them?
I have to go back and check my records, but I do believe that we sent a letter after the first public hearing. But I don't know that anyone is aware at this time that the conversation is being brought back forth, and so we
Yeah.
definitely want to do that.
But they were aware last year, I mean.
To a certain extent, I think that was one of some of the questions that council brought forward when that first came up last year was that maybe staff at the time could have done a better job of reaching out to the stakeholders. My understanding is that there were some in-person meetings that occurred last year. And so I think, you know, we didn't want to necessarily notify the stakeholders of today's conversation if it's not going to lead anywhere, but obviously if we bring it back as an action item and as a public hearing, absolutely, we'll make sure that we communicate with the stakeholders and give them enough notice so they can, if they'd like, you know, come and verbalize their opinion on it.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I think the time is right, so I'd definitely like to have it come back. And whatever steps are necessary to,
Yeah. Well, and Donald, can you remind us on when that project's expected to be completed?
Sure, that project should be completed in the spring of 2020. So we're coming pretty close. I believe it's about 70% complete now.
that's a lot of why I think the time is right now, as opposed to waiting until it's open, until Placido Benavides is open.
Get it done before it opens with you.
I'd also like to clarify, that if you look at the boundary, you also see that some of those properties are outside of the city limits. We do have development agreements for most of those properties whenever we did the Placido Benavides annexation. And so those rules would be affected, those properties would be affected by these rules. Also, the state allows us, we regulate subdivision regulations and have the authority to regulate signage on the ETJ.
Okay, but Julie, these properties, since they're not all annexed and they're part of the ETJ, some of them have the agricultural exemption?
Yes, ma'am, they signed the development agreement, which basically states they won't develop properties, and if they do, they are subject to voluntary annexation.
Would this design district impact that at all?
No, not the ag exemption, and the status quo could remain.
I have a question. The little boundary goes down and jogs in where Placido, if Placido Benavides was extended, it would go straight down to where you have the little boundary there. Why is that little part not included? What was the reasoning?
Are you speaking on the west end or the east end?
I'm talking about the very south end, the very bottom.
The city limit line, I think, is actually covering up the red,
The dash.
the dash city
I mean,
limit.
it goes like this, and there's a square that's left out.
Of the Salem, the corner of Salem and Loop 463. As you know, that's already a developed property for them. A lot of it is already developed with the Game Changer. And it's oriented and feels very much like it's a part of the 463 corridor. And so we generally followed property lines as well. It's another reason.
I'll get with you afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you, Julie. I think the next topics, I think Thomas will, spend 30 seconds on each.
30 seconds on each slide, right?
Yeah,
I only have 30
exactly.
slides, so we should be good.
Yeah, leave it up to the attorney to,
This is
I'm joking, 45 seconds.
45? Generous. Mayor Pro Tem and council members, I wanted to update you all tonight on some activity that's going on over at Victoria County. You are all aware, I'm sure, of the fact that the Victoria County is proposing to implement some game room regulations. And so I wanted to update you on the status of their project, as well as get your feedback on where we should proceed going forward. I'll have a recommendation for that as well. But before we dive into that, I'd like to back up 1 year to review how we got where we are today. You'll remember that about a year ago, council adopted a moratorium on issuing new game room permits until the city was able to bring back more stringent game room regulations with the goal of reducing or eliminating illegal game rooms within the city limits. We did that, and at the end of the prior regulatory scheme on December 31st, there were 20 game rooms operating in the city of Victoria. The next day, under the new regulatory scheme, there were 2. It was a 90% reduction overnight without seizing a single machine. I consider that to be a very successful program. Over the course of the last year, several things have changed, particularly that have impacted the county and that have led to the county desiring to implement their own regulatory scheme. The first of those 2 things that happened after our regulation is that many of the game rooms that previously were located in the city limits relocated outside the city limits and began operation in the county. I know of at least 2 of those that have been raided recently for illegal gambling activities and have been shut down by the sheriff's office. That has heightened the county's awareness of the negative impacts of those game rooms and has encouraged their desire to react to that situation. Simultaneously, the state adopted a new bill that allowed counties to actually go out and regulate them for the first time. Prior to September 1st of this year, only a few bracketed counties in the state were allowed to regulate game rooms. Those brackets were removed by this state legislature, and as of September 1, all counties statewide can adopt regulations for game rooms. That's fortuitous timing in that it has come at the same time that Victoria County is experiencing a problem that they want to resolve. And so Judge Ben Zeller has stated publicly that it is his desire to regulate game rooms throughout the county, including in the city limits, and that it is his stated goal to eliminate all game rooms. So I have met with the stakeholders internally within the city limits. I've attended the last 3 County Commissioners Court meetings to try to monitor their progress, as well as to talk about internally the ramifications that their regulation would have on our regulation. Because obviously, we don't want to have a competing regulation with the county. We want to all be on the same page, if at all possible. After meeting with our internal stakeholders, we've identified several advantages to the county's regulatory scheme over ours. The first is that they would be able to adopt consistent regulation both inside and outside the city. The city cannot, of course, adopt regulations that extend beyond our city limits, but the county can adopt regulations that extend into our city limits. Their proposal is that their regulatory scheme would apply countywide, including the city. The advantage, of course, is that it eliminates the chance of us having unintended loopholes that might allow illegal activity to happen if we were to have competing regulatory schemes between us and the county. And so there is some advantage in simply allowing them to take this over. Secondly, the state gave them significantly greater enforcement authority than we have in the city. The greatest enforcement authority that we have is a Class C misdemeanor, which, as you know, is a $500 fine and no jail time. The state gave counties up to a Class A misdemeanor enforcement authority, which is up to a $2,000 fine and a year in jail. So for the same type of regulatory scheme, the county can impose much harsher punishments and therefore hopefully have greater enforcement of that regulatory scheme. Likewise, the county can impose up to a $10,000 civil penalty, and they intend to impose that per day of violation, which is something we do not do. And finally, they can, of course, expand throughout the county, but on top of that, the state law allows them specifically to designate the location where game rooms are allowed to be located, including only within the county. The state law specifically gives them the authority to ban game rooms within the city limits, and they intend to take advantage of that. Finally, there's an advantage in allowing the county to administer the permit process because it would allow city employees to return to other responsibilities that they have. We also explored potential disadvantages. Some people might be concerned that we are giving up revenue because we do charge $780 per game room permit. But of course, remember that revenue is charged in order to recoup the expenses of administering that project. And so if we're not administering that program anymore, the loss of revenue would not impact any other city programs. There's questions about whether or not the police could enforce a regulation that's adopted by the county. And I can assure you, we've explored that option, and yes, the police department is thoroughly able to enforce the county regulations within the city limits the same way that they're currently enforcing the city's scheme. And so the police department would still be able to address game rooms that spring up within the city limits. Finally, there was some question about whether or not the city should cede control of their jurisdiction to another regulatory body. And I haven't seen any particular concern about that. I would remind you, council members, that other regulatory bodies frequently regulate within the city, and they often simply preempt our local registration. If you think, for example, of alcoholic beverage regulation, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission completely preempts our ability to regulate alcohol within the city limits, and we don't see that as a problem. I think so long as we're able to work cooperatively with the county in the development of regulations that will work for the city, that should not be a problem. And so even the things that we were able to identify as potential disadvantages, I think probably are not a concern wholesale for the city. Because of that, it is my recommendation that the city continue to support the county's adoption of game room regulations. I would continue to work collaboratively with the county and with their attorney on an effective ordinance within the county that would address the concerns that City Council has previously mentioned. I recommend that at the next City Council meeting, we adopt a moratorium on new game room permits that would extend through the end of the year and until such time as the county adopt their regulation. All of our current game room permits expire at the end of this calendar year. And I suspect that many of those permit holders are looking to file paperwork in the next month that would extend their permits for the next calendar year. And I think it's important that we go ahead and clear up the regulatory system within the city by issuing a moratorium and making it clear that we are not going to issue new permits until such time as the county regulatory scheme goes into effect. I don't want those permit holders to waste the time and money of applying for a permit that they're not going to get. Simultaneously, I don't know how long it's going to take the county to adopt their program, and so I would encourage council to adopt a moratorium that simultaneously extends the existing permits until the county regulatory scheme goes into effect, even if that's after the new year and that permit would have normally expired. Since we're telling them they can't apply for a new permit, I think we should allow the existing permits to extend. Finally, after the county adopts their program, I will recommend coming back and repealing the existing city game room regulations so that we don't have conflicting regulations on the books. So long as the county regulations meet the goals of the city, I think it's a good idea for us to simply clarify that by saying that we do not regulate game rooms going forward. I'm asking tonight for you to give me formal direction. That's my recommendation, is that we bring forth those 4 things, starting at the next council meeting with a moratorium. But I need direction from council in a formal manner before I proceed in that way. And before I turn it over to you guys for discussion, I do want to point out that in addition to giving you the printouts of this PowerPoint presentation, on your dais is a stapled document that looks like this. We received today I was going to call it a permit. I'm sorry, this is a petition. I drew a blank on the word for a second. A petition from citizens within the community who are interested in seeing game rooms continue. And so I want to make sure that you're aware of that petition, and I've copied it and put it at your dais for your consideration.
I like your approach. And I'd like you to continue working with the county to develop the ordinance that keeps the city of Victoria in mind, and banning it in municipalities would be great. And then follow through with the rest of the steps.
My question is, I think that they have to file with the, not city attorney, but the Secretary of State to get their permits before the end of the year. So with us telling them that we are not going to issue the permits by the city, and they have already obtained the permits from the state, how are you going to handle that?
Those current permit holders that have already gotten their certification from the Secretary of State, they've already formed their business entity, they will not be affected. They all did that a year ago when we implemented the new process. Any new business that is considering applying for next year, I think it's important that we let them know up front that we're not going to be issuing permits. And that's why I'm suggesting a moratorium as early as possible.
I understand that, but the ones that are existing, the 4 that are out there,
That's correct.
they need to go ahead and start applying now, because remember last year they were held up. And if they want to continue even past January the 1st, they have to apply now. So I'm asking, what do you plan to do with those 4 if they get the state permit and the state allows it?
I believe she's asking about the coin-operated amusement sticker from the state,
Right.
which is the state comptroller's
The
office.
State Comptroller's Office,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for that clarification, April. The State Comptroller issues tax stickers to game room operators for each machine. That is a completely separate process from our game room permit. Whether or not they have a game room permit from us, they have to get those stickers for each machine, all right? Now, some of them have already gone to the extent of acquiring those stickers. The State Comptroller's Office opened up that application process for them to begin applying for next year as of, I believe, last month. I don't have confirmation on that. I'm going from memory based on what we did last year, okay? I don't know whether any of those game room operators have applied for those stickers, and I do not know whether they will be able to use those stickers.
I feel like that's a conflict, but my
Does it mean
opinion on
that,
that.
does it mean that they can't use those machines elsewhere? Is
I
it
do not
tied to the
know.
machine?
I do not know whether or not those stickers could be used on machines in another county. I believe they can. The reason I believe that is we tried to get the comptroller to put addresses on those stickers so that we could limit the number of machines per address. You remember we went through that last year. And the stickers that were issued were not geographically limited in that way. And so it's my understanding that they can be used elsewhere, but I would have to look into that further to give you a definitive answer.
Most of the machines are not owned by the game room operators themselves. They tend to lease the machine, so it might be one owner that owns thousands of machines and then leases them out to different game rooms. So they probably, if they had the stickers, they could just move them to a different county, to a different leasee.
That was my idea.
I know some that own them, so that's why I was asking.
Oh, yeah.
And, people see this as a bad thing, but, when you get to be in your 60s, 70s, and 80s, you don't have too many friends. So a lot of these people go out there just for camaraderie. They go up there just to enjoy themselves for a while. They're not there to break the law. There's other people that give them a bad name. And, they're willing to donate part of their money to a charity. Somebody even suggested, we'll give the city some money to find some homeless, programs. But they're not out there, because if they don't have something to do, what are they gonna do? I mean, they can't just shrivel up and die. They're people, they wanna go out there and just have a little bit of time with friends. We're all going there. And what are we gonna do? I'm talking about the people who are there that are good people that just wanna have a good time. And it's nice, clean fun. It's not something, if anybody, I would suggest that y'all all go and take a look at the inside of a game room and see the people, the population that's in there, okay? And see that they're not doing anything wrong. This is something that, some people, they like to golf, some people like bingo, some people, but this is a segment of our population that if you take that away from them, just because you think they're doing something wrong, I don't see the logic in that.
I think that sadly, it's kind of a case of a bad apple spoiling the whole batch. And I don't think it's a statement about the people that are using the game rooms the way I believe they were designed. The problem is that there are more people that are either not using them in that way, or it just leads to so much abuse that it's just a dangerous thing and it's not safe for our citizens. And those that are there using them the way they should be used, we have to protect them too, because frankly, if I went into a game room, I'm probably naive enough that I would not recognize what was going on. I've talked to the police department, and there's a lot that does go on there that some people just aren't aware of. And I do want to go back and just make sure that that I understood, though, that with the moratorium that you're proposing, until the county passes a law, and at which point we might repeal ours, you're saying that anybody that has a permit right now, would continue to have that permit for as long as our moratorium exists, even if it goes into 2020.
That's my recommendation, yes. Since we are telling them they cannot apply for a new permit, I think we should allow the existing permits to continue.
Thank you.
Did you get any feel at the Commissioners Court on timing?
I have asked them to act urgently because of this timing issue at the end of the calendar year. I have spoken with their attorney who is working on the document, and a week ago, I would have told you I thought they were moving very quickly. There has been some difference of opinion at yesterday morning's Commissioners Court meeting. I don't want to speak for the commissioners, but it appears as though they are not speaking with a unanimous voice. And so I don't know whether that's going to slow down their process or not.
Thank you.
Well, I'll certainly voice my opinion in regards to, I believe what the county's doing, and I wholeheartedly support that.
Having heard from a majority of you, it sounds as though there is consensus on council, at least to consider that moratorium at the next meeting. And so at the next meeting, I will bring back a resolution declaring a moratorium, and y'all can continue to deliberate at that point and vote. It may not wind up being a unanimous decision, but that'll be for next week's or next meeting's decision to consider. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Solis, we have one more item on the agenda. It is a work session. It will probably be another 15 or 20 minutes. I know that we have had a long meeting. This may be a time for you to consider whether or not you would like to take a break or whether you would like to plow on into the next item.
Y'all want to go into executive session already?
Not executive session.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Okay, a work session.
Just a work session, right?
Or do we want to take a break?
What's
Okay.
fine.
I'm fine to stay here and finish up.
Yeah, let's stay here and finish up. Because we're going to go fishing.
We're going to go fishing?
Yeah. you-
Let's go.
My fishing reel, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the desktop image on
I know.
my laptop computer. I'll tell a little story. That's actually a fishing reel that I found in my dad's garage attic, and rebuilt. And my dad passed away 15 years ago or so. And so I've made myself a promise that I'm gonna take that reel out and go catch a fish. We'll see if it works out that way. All right, Mayor Pro Tem and council members, this last item on the agenda is a workshop on the Texas Open Meetings Act. This is a quick review of training procedures. The reason that we're doing this tonight is because several of you have signed up to attend an economic development conference this week, and we will actually have a quorum of city council attending that training seminar. And so I wanted to go over with you the rules related to the Open Meetings Act as it relates to those training seminars, and that just presented an opportunity for us to talk about the Open Meetings Act in general. There were some questions at a recent meeting about Open Meetings Act rules and training, and so I thought I would do a real quick review of the Open Meetings Act. And I promise you, I'm calling it a quick review because it will be quick. There are only 6 slides in this presentation, and I have put page numbers at the bottom of each slide so that you can see exactly where we are and you can keep me honest. And I'm calling it a review because you've each done this training on the Open Meetings Act at the Attorney General's website. As you know, you're required to do that training, and you all have completed it. So I have targeted this training towards the top 3 questions that I get asked on the Open Meetings Act. And I encourage you that if these 3 questions springboard you into another question about the Open Meetings Act that you would like to ask, please bring it up. That's why we have this posted as a workshop, so we can engage in dialogue about this. So anything that happens to come to you during the course of this process, please bring it up. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is, what can I, as a council member, say during a meeting? You know, of course, that the city council has to post the date, time, place, and subject of a meeting 72 hours before the scheduled time of the meeting so that the public can decide whether or not they want to attend and participate or at least observe the deliberation of council. And then once we get to that meeting, we can only deliberate the subjects that have been posted on that agenda. And that's why we have discussions like we did tonight about whether or not we can have a discussion at the dais. And Councilmember Dr. Young, I apologize to you. You were asking me a factual question earlier, which I interpreted as a rhetorical question. We'll get to that exception in just a second. But the general rule is that we can only deliberate subjects that have been posted in advance. The most significant impact on that in our meetings is that council members do not generally respond to citizens who come to the dais. I want to say that publicly because I know we're on TV and some citizens might be watching that. It is not our practice to respond to those questions that get asked at the dais, and we should continue it to be our practice, because if it has not been posted on the agenda, we're not allowed to deliberate that topic, all right? And we will continue to do that as much as we can. As I've already mentioned, there are several exceptions to this. If there is something that comes up in a meeting that you would like to talk about that is not on the agenda, you have a few options, one of which is a factual question. If you ask a factual question, we can give you a factual response to that or a recitation of city policy related to that in order to answer your question. The difference between a factual question and a rhetorical question, of course, is that a rhetorical question is asked for the purpose of making an argument or deliberating on the subject, rather than getting a factual response. And so that was where I misinterpreted the question earlier. I thought that the question was designed to be a deliberation on the subject, and that's why I was trying to shut that down. So you can see, as a lawyer, we get into gray areas very quickly, and we don't necessarily always think on our feet quickly enough to articulate that. So I could have done a better job earlier. In addition
I'll
to
stop
that,
being rhetorical.
in addition to that, you can ask for an item to be put on a future agenda. That is what Councilmember Lofgren was doing. We did not have that item on the agenda, and he was asking that we post it on for a future agenda. We also struggled with the issue of how you couch that on a future agenda. And again, that's getting into the gray areas of the law. But generally speaking, what I would prefer and what I would recommend is that if there is something that's not posted, you simply ask that we put it on a future agenda. And it has been our practice in the past that that gets put under items from council for discussion rather than that be put on as a resolution. Obviously, if a council member asks for something to be put on specifically as a resolution or recently as an ordinance, we will do what we can to make that happen, okay? Finally, occasionally there may be items of community interest that come up, whether that's the lighting of the Christmas tree or the square downtown or an announcement about the Veterans Day Parade. Those items can be brought up even if they're not on the agenda because those are simply items of community interest. They're really announcements rather than deliberations.
When is that Veterans Day Parade?
That would be next Monday, which is Veterans Day. I would have to defer to somebody about the time of the parade. It might be 10 a.m.
Colby's shaking his head yes.
Colby is nodding his head in the back that the
I just
parade
asked
starts at
because
10 a.m.
at our next meeting, it will have already occurred.
It will have already occurred, and that's right. And that's why these things frequently come up as ceremonial announcements. The second most frequent question I get asked is, what can I say outside of a meeting? And this is a bit of a trick question because, of course, if you're outside of a meeting, the Open Meetings Act doesn't apply, and you can say whatever you want. The trick, of course, is that if you are sitting at a table with a quorum of other council members and you are talking about city business, you are in a meeting. That is one of the definitions of a meeting in the act. And so that raises the issue where you frequently are sitting at a table counting noses. And I like to say that all of our council members can count to 3 plus me, because 3 plus me equals a quorum. And if you have a quorum, you are limited in what you can say. Of course, if you're sitting at a casual discussion with a quorum of council members, there probably has not been a posted agenda, which greatly limits the number of things you can say, because you can't deliberate it if it wasn't posted on an agenda. So generally speaking, you're not allowed to talk about city business with a quorum of council members. Again, there's a list of exceptions. And the middle exception on that list is regional conventions, and that's why we brought this up tonight. So let me start there. It's an exception to the rule that it's a meeting if you are at a regional convention, so long as the topics being discussed by a quorum of the council members are incidental to that discussion. So if you're at a regional conference on economic development, as many of you will be this week, and you happen to be at dinner on Thursday night, I've sent out an invitation, I hope you'll join me. If you happen to be at dinner and we're talking about economic development that night, even if we're talking about economic development within the city, that is incidental to the subject of the convention, and we are absolutely allowed to have that conversation. It is encouraged that we have those conversations because that's the benefit of going to those conferences. That's one of the reasons why we encourage council members to attend the TML conference on an annual basis, is because it gives an opportunity to learn and share ideas that you may not otherwise be able to do outside of a meeting. That same rule applies to social events, press conferences, candidate forums, and ceremonial events. So if you're at a social event like a chamber luncheon, and the chamber presenter happens to be talking about economic development, and you're sitting at a table with council members, that is still an exception to that rule about it being a meeting. You are allowed to have that discussion so long as it is merely incidental to the purpose of that social event. All right? Any questions about that exception? Because it's pretty broad. All right, I'll move on.
I do have a question. There have been several events with a specific topic. They're not hosted by the city. They're hosted by other organizations or by individuals. And they've invited council or they've invited a quorum. Does that fit into this exception or not?
If it is merely an informational session like the homeless forum, I didn't attend that, so I'm speaking based on what I've heard happened there, that it was not a business meeting. It was merely a gathering to discuss sharing of ideas. I would allow that to fall into the social events category. On the other hand, let me contrast that with a quorum of council members going to the Commissioners Court meeting where there is actually business being conducted. I have a hard time calling that a social event. I don't think you guys are getting together socially to go hang out and watch other governmental entities conduct their business. And so I don't think this exception would apply in that case. But again, like many things in the law, everything turns on the individual facts. If something comes up, call me and ask, and I can give you specific direction at that time.
I got one.
Yes.
So Victoria Days at the Capitol,
Yes.
if a quorum went and attended and spoke with one of our representatives about city business that was germane to, what we were doing. Is that a social event?
I believe that that is a social event. It's been typically organized in the past by the Chamber of Commerce, and it is open invitation for members of the community to participate. And you are participating both in your role as a citizen of the community and your role as a council member here. And I think it is an exception that would allow you to do that. Some of these things are not clear, okay? And I don't think that there is a clear court case on that particular issue, but that's the way I would interpret it. All right, the third question that I frequently get asked, what's up with walking quorums? I made that up. I've never been asked that question, but I thought you might want to know that there has been a significant change in the concept of walking quorums and that they are mostly dead. Walking quorums, you'll remember, is that issue, that concept that was created by the Attorney General's office several years ago. We have a saying among lawyers that bad facts make bad law, and there were some bad facts that led to that opinion being issued. What the Attorney General said, essentially, was that if Albert calls Bobby, and Bobby calls Cindy, and Cindy calls David, and all four of them are sitting on this city council, and they're talking about city business, that's a quorum of the council, even though that was 3 separate conversations. The Attorney General believed that those 4 members could be criminally prosecuted. Many attorneys in the state disagreed with that opinion, including me, because I think it's very difficult to prove that Albert knowingly shared information and tried to violate the statute. That chapter that was being violated was called conspiracy, and Albert didn't know anything except that he was talking to Bobby. Last year, the Court of Criminal Appeals, that's the Supreme Court in Texas for criminal cases. It's the highest court in the land for criminal cases. They agreed with that analysis, and they said it is unconstitutional to criminalize a walking quorum. There was actually, I believe it was a county commissioner in Montgomery County who was charged criminally with violating a walking quorum, and he appealed it all the way to the Court of Criminal Appeals. And in the Doyle versus State case, it was declared unconstitutional, and that entire section of code was stripped out of the Open Meetings Act. Now, those of you who were on council at the time, back in about February, you'll remember I gave you a memo at that time that said, this has been struck down, but I encourage you to continue to follow these rules because I think that the legislature will turn around and create new legislation to try to put that back in place. They did exactly that. Senate Bill 1640 re-implements the concept of a walking quorum, but I'm here to tell you today it is no longer the boogeyman hiding in your closet. It is no longer going to reach out and grab you without you knowing about it. Here's the standards that have to be met before anyone can be criminally prosecuted for a walking quorum. First, you have to knowingly engage in one communication about city business among a series of communications about city business. You have to know that your communication is part of a series. Second, you have to know that the quorum is going to involve a quorum of the members of the body. And third, you have to know that once the communication reaches a quorum, it will constitute a deliberation of the body in violation of the act. If you don't actually know those 3 things to be true at the moment you make your communication, you cannot be prosecuted under the new statute, or you cannot be convicted anyway. So I don't think that this nearly has the teeth that the old concept of a walking quorum had, and I want to encourage each of you to understand that you no longer have to be afraid that your communication is going to be inadvertently relayed to another council member and make you unknowingly a criminal. I think that the legislature is speaking very clearly in allowing council members to talk to each other, and that's a good thing. Okay? Any questions about that before I move on? I have one other slide, and I'll admit that it is not related to the Open Meetings Act. It has to do with Robert's Rules, which often gets twisted up with the Open Meetings Act because they both seem to be rules applying to how we run our business in our meetings. And I want to point out to you that Robert's Rules of Order are merely rules of parliamentary procedure. They are not legally binding. The reason I'm saying that is 2 reasons. Number one, we sometimes get wrapped around the axle on Robert's Rules of Order about whether a motion has been made correctly or whether a motion has bin seconded correctly. There's an easy way to resolve those disputes. If anyone makes a point of order and asks the chair to rule on what's the correct procedure for us to follow, the chair, that's the mayor, can simply say, we're going to do it this way. He can make a ruling on the correct procedure for us to follow. If you believe the mayor's ruling is incorrect, there is a motion in Robert's Rules to challenge the ruling of the chair. And what happens then, if the motion gets seconded, we simply vote. What's the correct procedure to follow? If a majority of council agrees that this is the correct procedure, it becomes the correct procedure. And because rules of parliamentary procedure are not binding legally, there's no one outside of this board who can come back later and say we did it wrong. So what I'm saying is, we can relax a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order. We are a board of less than about a dozen, and Robert's Rules is significantly relaxed for a board of our size. The goal of Robert's Rules is simply to get our business done as efficiently as possible. And so we can continue to do that. There's another reason I put this slide up here, though, and it's something that's in our code that I'm going to ask you to change. Section 2-24 of the City Code says, and I've quoted it here, the rules of procedure stated in Robert's Rules of Order, currently revised edition, shall govern the proceedings of City Council. Do you see how somebody might misread that section to believe that we as a city council, you as city council, I'm not an elected member, that you as city council are bound by law, the city code, to follow Robert's Rules to the letter? I don't interpret it that way. I think that this was put in the code way back in 1960 simply as a way of saying we hereby adopt Robert's Rules as our parliamentary procedure rules. But it's worded in an unfortunate way. And I would like to bring you an amendment that would change this section to make it clear that Robert's Rules are merely parliamentary rules and they are not binding under city code, because I don't want anybody to misconstrue that and believe that we are somehow bound by law to follow them. And if you're okay with that, I will bring that back as a proposal in the near future.
I'm okay with that. I don't want to toss them out completely just because we don't have to follow them. I think they really do give us quite a bit of predictability.
I agree with that. Robert's Rules are good when they're seen in the proper light.
No, I like them. They provide structure to the meeting.
I think it's good that you're going to change the wording. It makes it more appropriate to our diocese.
Thank you.
I didn't realize it was possible to create half a page, half a slide.
You want me to go back to the page one? Page one is the same as the end. So there you go. There's slide number 1, slide number 6. They're the same. I only counted it as a half.
Yeah.
You were counting.
Yeah, he got it on there. He got the half on there.
Oh, okay.
You could have put 2 per page. We would have saved paper.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I could have printed it 2 up. But then you wouldn't have gotten the notes pages, which are obviously important.
You're right.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and members of council.
Thank you.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I believe this concludes the business of the meeting.
Yes. So having no further business, this meeting's adjourned.